So hey guys, this is your favorite fictional vortex. So in this video, we will see what if Naruto was the dragon sage king of a lost royal bloodline Naruto. To X Azula X Ty Lee X my avatar, the last airbender. But before we start, remember to subscribe and like this video. Now let's start. Chapter 1. The Maelstrom's Awakening. The Tempest was a symphony of chaos. A masterpiece of nature's fury. Rain, driven by winds that shrieked like vengeful spirits, fell in near horizontal sheets, each drop a stinging needle against exposed flesh. The sea, a churning cauldron of black water and frothing white, hurled itself against the jagged volcanic rock of the island with a percussive violence that seemed to shake the very foundations of the world. It was into this maelstrom of sound and fury that Naruto Uzumaki was born anew, with the taste of salt and ozone on his tongue and the echo of a forgotten life in the hollows of his memory. He awoke not with a start, but with a slow, creeping awareness, like a man emerging from a dream that clung to him with an unnerving tenacity. The coarse, black sand of the beach was a rough caress against his cheek. And the frigid water that lapped at his boots was a stark reminder of his own mortality. He pushed himself up, his muscles protesting with a dull ache, and surveyed his surroundings through a haze of confusion. The island was a stark and desolate place, a jagged spear of volcanic rock thrusting defiantly from the tumultuous sea. Twisted, skeletal trees, stripped bare by the relentless wind, clung to the rocky slopes like desperate supplicants. The sky above was a bruised canvas of angry purples and grays, illuminated by the intermittent, ghostly flicker of lightning. A wave of vertigo washed over him, and he stumbled, his hand instinctively flying to his head. A dull, throbbing pain resonated from behind his eyes, a physical manifestation of the void in his memory. He could remember his name, Naruto Uzumaki. But little else. Fragments of a life he once knew, of a home he could no longer picture, flickered at the edges of his consciousness like dying embers, too faint to grasp, too fleeting to ignite into a coherent thought. He remembered a face, a woman with hair the color of a crimson sunset, her eyes filled with a love that was both a comfort and an ache. He remembered a sensation, the feeling of a power that was both a part of him and something more, a wild and untamed force that surged through his veins like a river of fire. But these were mere whispers in the roaring silence of his mind. Ghosts of a past that was as lost to him as a ship swallowed by the sea. He took a deep breath, the salt-laced air a raw and invigorating shock to his system. Panic was a luxury he could not afford. He was alive, he was whole, and that, for now, would have to be enough. He began to walk, his footsteps a solitary rhythm against the chaotic symphony of the storm. He followed the curve of the beach, the black sand crunching under his boots, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of a ship, of civilization, of anything other than the raw and unforgiving wilderness that surrounded him. Days bled into one another, each a struggle for survival against the unforgiving elements. He learned to read the tides, to find shelter in the shallow caves that pockmarked the island's cliffs, to forage for the strange, bitter-tasting fruits that grew in the sheltered crevices of the rocks. He was a creature of instinct, his body moving with a grace and a purpose that belied the confusion in his mind. He was a survivor, and in the crucible of his solitude, he began to rediscover the power that lay dormant within him. It happened during a moment of desperation. He was cornered by a pack of a creature he had never seen before, a monstrous fusion of a wolf and a reptile with scales as black as obsidian and teeth like shards of glass. They were relentless, their eyes burning with a predatory hunger. He fought back with a ferocity born of a primal fear, his fists and feet a blur of motion. But there were too many of them, and he was weakening, his movements growing sluggish. As one of the creatures lunged for his throat, its jaws agape, something within him snapped. A surge of energy, hot and potent, erupted from the core of his being. It was not the familiar, comforting warmth of chakra that he vaguely remembered, but something else, something wilder, more primal. It was a raw, untamed force that tasted of ozone and lightning, of the earth and the sky. He felt it coalesce in his palm, a swirling vortex of crimson energy that crackled with an untamed power. He thrust his hand forward, and a torrent of this strange energy, which he instinctively knew as Ryuki, erupted from his palm, striking the creature with the force of a thunderclap. The beast was thrown back, its body charred and smoking, and the rest of the pack, their predatory hunger replaced by a primal fear, scattered into the shadows. He stared at his hand, at the faint, crimson glow that still pulsed beneath his skin. This was Ryuki, the dragon's key, a power that was as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. And with that realization, a flood of memories returned, not of his past life, but of a different life, a life of training, of discipline, of a sacred duty. He was a dragon sage, the last of a royal bloodline. A guardian of a power that could either create or destroy. He did not know how he had come to this world, or why, but he knew that he was not just Naruto Uzumaki, a boy with a forgotten past. He was something more, something greater. It was this newfound sense of purpose that led him to Iro. He had seen the old man from a distance, a solitary figure sitting on a cliff overlooking the sea. Seemingly oblivious to the storm that raged around him. There was an aura of tranquility about him, a stillness that was a stark contrast to the chaos of the island. Naruto had approached him with caution, his senses on high alert. But as he drew closer, he felt not a threat, but a sense of profound peace emanating from the old man. Iro had turned to him, his eyes, the color of warm honey, filled with a gentle wisdom. He had smiled, a warm and genuine smile that seemed to chase away the chill of the rain. "I have been waiting for you, young one," he had said, his voice a low and soothing rumble. Like the distant roll of thunder. "The spirits of this island have been whispering your name on the wind." Naruto had been taken aback, but he had also felt a strange sense of familiarity. As if he had known this man before, in another life, perhaps. He had sat with Iro, and they had shared a cup of tea, a simple act of civility that felt like a balm to his weary soul. Iro had listened to his fragmented story with a patient and understanding ear, his gentle eyes never leaving Naruto's face. He had not offered answers, but he had offered something more valuable, a sense of belonging, a sense of hope. Under Iro's tutelage, Naruto began to explore the depths of his Ryuki. The old man was a master of a different kind of energy, a fire that was not just a destructive force, but a source of life and warmth. He taught Naruto to control his power, to shape it, to use it not just as a weapon, but as a tool. He taught him about the world of Avatar, about the four nations, about the 100-year war that had ravaged the land. He spoke of the Fire Nation, of its ambition, of its cruelty, but also of its people, of their passion, of their honor. It was during one of their training sessions that they were interrupted. Naruto had been practicing his control over his Ryuki, weaving it into intricate patterns of light and energy, when he felt a sudden shift in the air. A prickling sensation on his skin that warned him of an approaching danger. He looked up to see a Fire Nation ship, its black hull cutting through the churning waves like a shark through water. And on the deck of the ship, 3 figures stood silhouetted against the stormy sky. Even from a distance, he could feel the power radiating from one of them, a young woman with a regal bearing and an aura of command that was as sharp and as cold as a shard of ice. She was flanked by 2 other girls, one with a lithe and graceful build, the other with a stoic and impassive demeanor. They were warriors, he could tell. Their bodies honed and disciplined, their eyes sharp and focused. Iro sighed, a weary and resigned sound. "It seems my niece has finally found me," he said, his voice laced with a hint of sadness. "And it seems she has brought her friends." The 3 girls descended from the ship, their movements a study in grace and efficiency. The leader, the one with the aura of command, stepped forward, her golden eyes, the color of a molten sun, fixing on Naruto with an unnerving intensity. She was beautiful, in a fierce and predatory way, her black hair pulled back in a severe topknot, her red and gold armor gleaming in the dim light. "I am Azula, princess of the Fire Nation," she announced, her voice a sharp and imperious command. "And you are trespassing on Fire Nation territory." Naruto met her gaze without flinching, a small, defiant smile playing on his lips. "And I am Naruto Uzumaki," he replied, his voice calm and steady. "And I don't believe in trespassing." Azula's eyes narrowed, a flicker of annoyance crossing her perfect features. "You are either very brave or very foolish," she said, her voice dripping with a condescending amusement. "Perhaps a bit of both." The girl with the graceful build, the one with a cheerful and almost too bright smile, giggled. "He's cute," she said, her voice a light and airy melody. "Can we keep him, Azula?" The third girl, the one with the stoic expression, simply rolled her eyes, her boredom a palpable force. Azula ignored her companions, her attention solely focused on Naruto. You are a firebender, she stated, her eyes flickering to the faint crimson glow that still pulsed beneath his skin. But your fire is different. It's undisciplined, chaotic. It needs a master. I am my own master, Naruto replied, his smile widening. And I don't think you're qualified for the job. That was the last straw for Azula. With a flick of her wrist, a bolt of blue fire, impossibly hot, impossibly precise, shot from her fingertips, streaking towards Naruto's chest. But Naruto was ready. He moved with a speed that was almost inhuman, his body a blur of motion. He sidestepped the attack, the blue fire hissing past him, singeing the air with its heat. Tai Li, my, Azula commanded, her voice sharp with annoyance. Take him. The two girls moved in unison, a whirlwind of coordinated attacks. Tai Li, the cheerful one, was a blur of acrobatic grace. Her movements fluid and unpredictable. She came at him from the front, her hands striking at his pressure points with a speed that was almost impossible to follow. Mai, the stoic one, was a shadow at his back. Her knives, thrown with a deadly precision, whistling through the air, aimed at his vital points. It was a deadly dance, a symphony of violence. But Naruto was a master of his own art. He moved with a fluid and instinctual grace, his body weaving and dodging, his senses on high alert. He could feel their attacks before they were even launched, a strange and exhilarating prescience that guided his movements. He deflected Tai Li's strikes with the back of his hand, the force of her blows barely registering. He caught Mai's knives out of the air, his fingers a blur of motion. The sharp blades held harmlessly between his fingers. He was not just defending, he was learning, analyzing their movements, their strategies, their weaknesses. He could see the fire that lay hidden beneath Tai Li's cheerful facade, the loneliness that was a constant companion to Mai's stoicism. He could see the ambition that drove Azula, the burning desire to prove herself, to be the best, to be perfect. And then, he went on the offensive. He did not use his Ryuki, not yet. He used his body, his speed, his strength. He disarmed Mai with a flick of his wrist, her knives clattering to the ground. He neutralized Tai Li with a single, precise strike to her shoulder, a Kai blocking technique that he had learned from Iro, a technique that he had perfected with his own unique twist. Tai Li stumbled back, her arm hanging limp at her side, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and admiration. He turned to face Azula, a challenging glint in his eyes. The princess was seething, her pride wounded, her perfect composure shattered. She attacked him with a barrage of blue fire, her rage fueling the intensity of her flames. But Naruto was no longer just dodging. He was dancing with the fire. His movements a graceful and fluid ballet. He used the force of her attacks to propel himself, to change direction, to create openings. And then, he saw his chance. As Azula launched another attack, he moved in close. Too close for her to react. He caught her wrist, his grip like iron, and with a gentle but firm pressure, he redirected her attack, the bolt of blue fire harmlessly exploding against a nearby rock. He held her there, their faces inches apart, their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. He could feel the heat radiating from her skin, the rapid, angry beat of her heart. He could see the surprise in her golden eyes, the flicker of something that was not just anger, but a grudging respect, a spark of fascination. He released her, a small, triumphant smile on his lips. I told you, he said. His voice a low and confident murmur. I am my own master. For a long moment, there was silence, broken only by the roar of the sea and the cry of the wind. Azula stared at him, her golden eyes searching his face, a storm of conflicting emotions raging within her. And then, a slow, dangerous smile spread across her lips. Perhaps, she said, her voice a low and seductive purr. But even a master can learn a new trick or two. And in that moment, Naruto knew that his life had once again taken an unexpected turn. He had come to this world a stranger, a boy with a forgotten past. But now, he was something more. He was a dragon sage, a warrior, and, he suspected, a player in a game that was far more dangerous, and far more exciting, than he could have ever imagined. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Serpent's Coil. The dragon's talon was a marvel of Fire Nation engineering, a vessel of polished steel and dark, lacquered wood that sliced through the churning sea. With an arrogant disregard for the ocean's fury. Yet, for all its might, it felt like a cage. The storm that had been Naruto's welcome to this world still raged, its howling winds and percussive rain a constant oppressive reminder of his confinement. He stood on the aft deck, a solitary figure cloaked in a borrowed Fire Nation tunic that felt foreign against his skin, his hands resting on the cold, wet railing. He was not in chains. Not confined to a cell, but he was a prisoner nonetheless. A guest, Azula had called him, with a smile that was all sharp edges and predatory gleam. The distinction was purely semantic. He watched the three women who were his captors. They moved about the ship with a practiced ease, their forms a study in controlled power. Azula, the princess, was the undisputed center of their small universe. She stood at the ship's helm, her back ramrod straight, her posture radiating an unyielding authority that seemed to challenge the storm itself. Her commands to the crew were clipped, precise, and obeyed without question. Every gesture, every flick of her wrist, was economical and deliberate, a physical manifestation of a mind that was constantly calculating, constantly assessing. She was a weapon honed to a razor's edge, and Naruto found himself both wary and fascinated by the sheer intensity of her focus. He could feel her Ryuki, or what passed for it in this world. Her firebending, a tightly coiled spring of blue-hot energy, held in check by a will of pure iron. Then there was Ty Lee. She was Azula's opposite in almost every conceivable way. Where Azula was rigid, Ty Lee was fluid, her body a constant river of motion. Even now, standing on the swaying deck, she seemed to be in a state of perpetual balance, her light frame shifting with the ship's roll as if it were a dance. She was currently entertaining a group of nervous-looking guards with a series of acrobatic feats, her laughter a bright, tinkling sound that was almost lost in the roar of the wind. Her energy was a vibrant, chaotic splash of color against the ship's drab, militaristic gray. It was open, expressive, and radiated a warmth that was as genuine as Azula's was manufactured. Yet, beneath the bubbly exterior, Naruto sensed a flicker of something else, a deep-seated need for approval, a fear of stillness that kept her constantly in motion. And finally, she was a study in stillness. A creature of shadows and silence. She stood apart from the others, leaning against the mast, her dark eyes hooded and her expression a mask of bored indifference. She was sharpening a collection of stilettos and shuriken. The soft, rhythmic scrape of stone against steel a quiet counterpoint to the storm's cacophony. Her energy was a void, a carefully constructed emptiness designed to repel. To keep the world at arm's length. She moved with a languid grace that was deceptive. Naruto had seen her in action on the island and knew that beneath that bored exterior lay a predator's speed and precision. She was a closed book. Its pages filled with a story he suspected was far more compelling than the bland cover suggested. His de facto jailer, Iro, approached him, a steaming cup of tea held carefully in his hands. The old man moved with the unhurried gait of one who was at peace with the world, a small island of tranquility in the midst of the tempest. A storm is a good time for reflection, Iro said, his voice a warm and comforting rumble. He handed Naruto the cup, the fragrant steam a welcome warmth against the biting cold. It washes the world clean and reminds us that even the most powerful of empires are subject to the whims of nature. Naruto took a sip, the jasmine tea a complex and soothing flavor on his tongue. It also makes it difficult to escape, he noted dryly, his eyes still on Azula. Iro chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. Patience, young Uzumaki. Every storm eventually passes. The important thing is to know when to seek shelter and when to set sail. His gaze followed Naruto's to his niece. My niece is a force of nature in her own right. She burns brightly, but such a fire, if not properly tended, can consume everything in its path, including itself. She seems to have it under control, Naruto observed. Azula had just berated a helmsman for a minor course correction, her voice cutting through the wind with a chilling precision. Control is not the same as mastery, Iro corrected gently. Control is about suppressing the flame, forcing it to bend to your will. Mastery is about understanding its nature, becoming one with it, allowing Chi to flow through you without destroying you. Azula has an abundance of the former, but she has yet to learn the latter. Their conversation was cut short by the princess herself. The storm, as if sing a lull in the ship's internal drama, began to subside, the torrential rain softening to a steady drizzle, the shrieking wind mellowing to a mournful sigh. Azula turned from the helm, her golden eyes, sharp as a hawk's. pinning Naruto in place. "Uncle," she said, her tone formal and cool. "I trust our guest is not causing you any trouble." "Naruto has been a perfect gentleman," Iro replied with a serene smile. "We were just discussing the finer points of weather and philosophy." Azula's lips thinned into a semblance of a smile. "How quaint. I, on the other hand, am more interested in the practical applications of power." She walked towards them, her boots making no sound on the wet deck. She stopped before Naruto, her gaze sweeping over him in a way that was both dismissive and intensely curious. "The energy you wield, it is not firebending. I have studied every known form, every obscure technique from the Sun Warriors to the forgotten masters of the Wulong Forest. What you do is different. It's called Ryuki," Naruto answered simply, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Dragon's Ki. It's the life force of the world, channeled through the body of a sage." "A sage?" Azula's eyebrow arched in amusement. "You don't look like any sage I've ever read about. They are typically old, bearded, and prone to speaking in riddles." "Maybe I'm a new and improved model," Naruto shot back, a smirk playing on his lips. A flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps, or was it interest, danced in her eyes. "This, Ryuki," she continued, circling him slowly, like a predator sizing up its prey. "It is raw, untamed. Powerful, yes, but sloppy. On the island, you fought with instinct, not technique. You have the strength of a dragon, but the finesse of a rampaging Komodo rhino. And you have the finesse of a surgeon," Naruto countered, "but the heart of a machine. All precision, no soul." The air crackled with a sudden tension. Ty Lee stopped her acrobatics, her cheerful smile faltering. Mai looked up from her blades, her dark eyes watching the exchange with a flicker of something that might have been interest. Even the crew members seemed to be holding their breath. Azula stopped in front of him, her face inches from his. He could see the flecks of gold in her irises, the faint tightening of the muscles around her jaw. He expected an explosion, a flash of blue fire, a sharp retort. Instead, she laughed. It was not a warm or joyous sound. It was sharp, brittle, like the shattering of glass, but it was genuine. "No soul," she repeated, savoring the words. "You may be right. A soul is a weakness. It breeds sentiment, doubt, hesitation. These are luxuries a warrior, a princess, cannot afford." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But you have soul in abundance. It pours off you in waves. It's a fascinating flaw. I wonder how much pressure it would take to break it." Before Naruto could respond, she straightened up and turned away. "The storm has passed. The sea is calm. It's a perfect time for a game." She gestured towards the main cabin. "Join me. I want to test the mind behind that untamed power. Let's see if your strategic skills are as sloppy as your energy control." She glanced back at him over her shoulder, a challenge glittering in her golden eyes. "Unless, of course, you're afraid." The main cabin was a spacious and opulent chamber, decorated with Fire Nation banners and intricate carvings of dragons. A large, low table dominated the center of the room, upon which sat a pie show board, its polished wood gleaming in the light of the swaying lanterns. The air was thick with the scent of sandalwood incense and a palpable sense of anticipation. Azula sat on one side of the board, her posture impeccable, her hands resting calmly on her knees. She had shed her armor for a simple but elegant red and black robe, and her hair was unbound, cascading down her back like a river of polished obsidian. Naruto took the seat opposite her. Iro settled into a corner with a fresh pot of tea, a silent observer. Ty Lee and Mai stood near the doorway, their curiosity having gotten the better of them. Ty Lee was practically vibrating with excitement, while Mai leaned against the wall, her arms crossed, feigning an air of indifference that she clearly did not feel. "The rules of Pie Show are simple," Azula began, her voice smooth and confident as she placed her first tile, a white lotus, in the center of the board. "But the strategies are infinite. It is a game of balance, of foresight, of understanding your opponent's mind. It is a microcosm of war. Or a microcosm of life," Naruto countered, placing a white dragon tile to block her initial move. His own memories of the game were hazy, more instinct than conscious thought. A gift from his fragmented past. It's not just about destroying your opponent. It's about creating harmony, finding the flow. Azula scoffed. Harmony is an illusion for the weak. There is only victory or defeat. Domination or submission. She placed an orchid tile, an aggressive move that threatened his flank. Tell me, Sage, what is your philosophy on power? You wield it so freely, so carelessly. What do you believe is its ultimate purpose? Each of her moves on the board was a physical manifestation of her words, sharp, aggressive, and aimed at overwhelming his defenses. Naruto responded with a knotweed tile, a defensive move that was also a subtle trap. Power is a tool, he said, his eyes never leaving the board. It can be used to build or to break. The purpose isn't in the power itself, but in the hands that wield it. He looked up, his gaze meeting hers. I believe its purpose is to protect, to create a space where people can live without fear. A noble sentiment, Azula said with a dismissive wave of her hand as she captured one of his minor tiles. And utterly naive. Fear is the most effective tool of all. It ensures order, it commands respect, it keeps the masses in line. A world without fear is a world of chaos. Her strategy was relentless, a constant assault on his positions, forcing him to react, to defend, to be on the back foot. She was trying to dictate the pace of the game, just as she tried to dictate the world around her. Naruto smiled. You're trying to force me into a defensive posture, to make me play your game. But the board is bigger than you think. Instead of reinforcing his threatened flank, he placed a chrysanthemum tile on the opposite side of the board, an seemingly unrelated move that made no tactical sense. Azula frowned, her concentration broken for the first time. A wasted move. You sacrifice your position for, what? A flight of fancy. Patience, princess, Naruto said calmly. You see the board as a battlefield. A series of skirmishes to be won. I see it as a web. Every thread is connected. They played on in a tense silence, the only sound the soft click of the tiles on the wood. Azula continued her aggressive assault. But Naruto refused to be drawn into a direct confrontation. He made seemingly random moves, sacrificing tiles, opening up his lines, playing a game that seemed to have no internal logic. Azula's initial confidence began to waver, replaced by a growing frustration. She was winning, by any conventional measure. She controlled more of the board, had captured more of his pieces. And yet, she felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling that she was being led into a trap of her own making. The goal of the game, for those who seek harmony, is to create a chain of harmonious tiles. Iroh's voice suddenly filled the silence. He had moved to stand behind Naruto, looking at the board with a thoughtful expression. My niece plays to capture the enemy's pieces. Naruto is playing an entirely different game. It was then that Azula saw it. Naruto's seemingly random placements had not been random at all. The chrysanthemum tile, the knotweed, a seemingly abandoned rose tile, they were all part of a larger pattern. A subtle, intricate web that was slowly closing around her own pieces. His wasted moves had been the foundation of a grander strategy, one she had been too focused on her own aggression to see. With a single, final move, Naruto placed a jasmine tile in the center of his web. The connection was made. A beautiful, intricate pattern of white flowers bloomed across the board. A chain of harmony that rendered all of her aggressive positioning, all of her captured pieces, utterly meaningless. He hadn't defeated her, he had simply made her entire strategy irrelevant. The silence in the room was profound. Tai Li's jaw was open in a silent, oh of astonishment. Mai had pushed herself off the wall, her dark eyes wide with a newfound respect. Azula stared at the board, her face pale, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the table. She had not just been beaten, she had been completely outmaneuvered, her entire philosophy of overwhelming force rendered impotent by a strategy of patience and interconnectedness. How? She whispered, the single word a crack in her carefully constructed facade of invincibility. You were so focused on the storm, Naruto said softly, that you didn't see the tide changing. He looked at her, not with triumph, but with a surprising gentleness. Your power is immense, Azula. But you let it control you. You think it's your greatest strength. But it's also your greatest prison. You're so afraid of showing any weakness that you can't see the strengths that come from vulnerability, from connection, from harmony. For a long, terrifying moment, Naruto thought he had pushed her too far. A flicker of raw, unrestrained fury ignited in her eyes, and the air in the cabin grew heavy, the temperature rising several degrees. He could feel the raw power churning within her, a tempest of blue fire threatening to erupt. But then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, suppressed by that iron will. She took a deep, shuddering breath and stood up, her face an unreadable mask once more. "The game is over," she said, her voice cold and distant. "You have proven your point. You are more than just a brute." She turned and strode from the cabin without another word, a queen retreating from a battlefield where she had suffered an unexpected and total defeat. Later that night, Naruto found himself in his temporary quarters, a small, Spartan cabin that was nevertheless more comfortable than the caves he had been sleeping in. He was meditating, trying to center himself, to explore the further reaches of his Ryuki and the fragmented memories that came with it. A soft knock on his door broke his concentration. He opened it to find Mai standing there, a tray of food in her hands. "You missed dinner," she said, her voice its usual monotone. Azula was displeased. She tends to skip meals when she's displeased. Which is often. She walked past him into the room and set the tray down on a small table. "Thanks," Naruto said, genuinely surprised. "I didn't figure you for the room service type." Mai shrugged, her gaze drifting around the small cabin. "Ty Lee would have brought it, but she'd have stayed and talked your ear off for an hour. I figured you'd prefer the quiet." "You figured right," he admitted. He sat down and looked at the food, a bowl of rice, some grilled fish, and pickled vegetables. "So, Azula sent you." "She didn't have to," Mai replied, her back still to him. "I was curious." She finally turned to face him, her dark, kohl-rimmed eyes studying him with an intensity that was unnerving. "No one beats her. Not at anything. Especially not at Pai's show. That's her game. Her father taught her. She says it taught her everything she needs to know about military strategy." "Maybe her father didn't teach her all the lessons the game has to offer," Naruto suggested, taking a bite of the fish. "It was surprisingly good." Mai was silent for a moment. "You weren't afraid of her," she stated, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "Everyone is afraid of Azula. Even Ty Lee. Even me." "Being afraid and showing fear are two different things," Naruto said. "She uses fear as a weapon. If you show her it doesn't work on you, she doesn't know what to do." He looked at her, really looked at her, past the bored expression and the dark clothes. He saw a flicker of loneliness in her eyes, a profound sense of isolation. "It must be exhausting," he said softly. Mai blinked, thrown off by his sudden change in topic. "What must be exhausting?" "Pretending not to care about anything," he clarified. "Building all those walls to keep everyone out. It must get lonely in there." For the first time since he'd met her, Mai's mask of indifference slipped. A flicker of vulnerability, of surprise, crossed her features before being quickly suppressed. She looked away, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't know anything about me. I know what it feels like to be alone," Naruto said, his own voice quiet. The words came from a place of deep, instinctual truth, a memory from a life he couldn't quite recall but could feel in his bones. "And I know that sometimes, the people who act the toughest are the ones who are hurting the most." He expected her to deny it, to throw a sarcastic retort at him, to retreat back behind her walls. Instead, she just stood there, silent, for a long time. Then, she walked to the door. "Just eat your fish," she said, without her usual bite. And then she was gone, leaving Naruto alone with his food and the distinct feeling that he had just seen a crack in the armor of the girl who cared about nothing. The next day brought a new and unsettling change. An unnatural fog, thick as a shroud, had descended upon the ship, clinging to it with a damp, chilling embrace. Visibility was reduced to a few feet, and an eerie silence settled over the sea, the waves lapping against the hull with a soft, hungry sound. The crew was on edge, their whispers filled with O.L.D. superstitions of ghost ships and sea monsters. Iro stood on the deck, his brow furrowed in concern as he stared into the dense, gray mist. "This is no ordinary fog," he murmured as Naruto joined him at the railing. "There is an energy in the air, something ancient and powerful." As if on cue, a low, mournful cry echoed through the fog, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of their bones. The ship lurched violently, and a massive, serpentine head, larger than the ship's bridge, erupted from the water. Its scales were the color of a deep-sea trench, its eyes a pair of glowing, malevolent emeralds. Its maw opened in a terrifying roar, revealing rows of teeth like obsidian daggers. It was a sea serpent, a creature of legend, and it was looking at their ship as if it were a mid-morning snack. Panic erupted. The crew scattered, their training and discipline dissolving in the face of primal terror. Azula was the first to react, her fear instantly sublimated into focused rage. She leapt onto the upper deck, a torrent of brilliant blue fire erupting from her hands. The flames struck the creature's hide with explosive force but seemed to do little more than anger it, hissing into steam against its wet, impossibly thick scales. "My, Tai Li, to me," Azula commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. Mai unleashed a volley of knives, her aim as true as ever, but the projectiles bounced harmlessly off the serpent's armor like scales. Tai Li attempted to get close, her acrobatic skills allowing her to dodge the creature's initial lunges, but what could she do? Kai block a creature the size of a mountain. The serpent reared back, its massive tail rising from the water. It was going to smash the ship to splinters. They were out of their depth, their specialized skills, so effective against humans, rendered useless against this mythical beast. It was in that moment of despair that Naruto took command. "Azula, your fire is hot, but it's too direct. You need to boil the water around it. Create a steam barrier to obscure its vision," he yelled, his voice resonating with an authority that surprised even himself. "Mai, don't aim for the scales. Aim for the eyes. It's your only target." He turned to a stunned Tai Li. "Tai Li, I need you to be a distraction. Get its attention, but don't get hit. Can you do that?" For a moment, they just stared at him, shocked into inaction. But the raw confidence in his voice, the certainty in his eyes, cut through their fear. Azula, her pride warring with the cold logic of their impending doom, gritted her teeth and nodded. Mai gave a sharp, affirmative jerk of her head. Tai Li, her fear still visible but now overlaid with a fierce determination, gave him a shaky but resolute smile. "You got it." With his team in motion, Naruto focused his own power. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, and reached for the Ryuki within him. He didn't summon the raw, explosive force he'd used on the island. He drew it out gently, shaping it, molding it with his will. He could feel the ocean, the life force within the water, the ancient power of the serpent itself. He was not just fighting a monster, he was connecting with the very elements around him. He slammed his palms down on the deck of the ship. A surge of crimson energy shot from his hands, not into the serpent, but into the water. The sea around the beast began to churn, to twist, to form a massive whirlpool. The serpent, caught in the vortex, roared in confusion and rage, its massive body pulled off balance. "Now, Azula," Naruto roared. Azula, seeing the opportunity, unleashed a massive, sustained blast of blue fire, not at the serpent, but at the water's surface as Naruto had instructed. A huge cloud of superheated steam erupted, enveloping the creature's head in a blinding, scalding fog. The serpent thrashed blindly, its roars now filled with pain and frustration. "Mai." From the crow's nest, Mai let fly a single, perfectly aimed stiletto. It flew through the steam, a silver streak in the gray, and found its mark in the creature's massive green eye. The serpent shrieked, a sound of pure agony that shattered the air, and its head thrashed wildly, smashing into the ship's mast, which cracked and splintered under the force of the blow. Tai Li chose that moment to act, using the broken mast as a springboard to launch herself into the air. Our bright form a fleeting distraction that drew the creature's remaining eye. It was the opening Naruto needed. He leapt onto the ship's railing, his body glowing with a powerful crimson aura. He gathered his Ryuki into his right hand, compressing it, shaping it not into a blunt blast, but into a sharp, focused point of pure energy, a spear of dragon's ki. "The spirits of the sea are not to be trifled with," he intoned, his voice seeming to echo with the power of ages. But neither is a dragon sage. He launched himself from the railing, a crimson comet against the gray fog. He flew through the air, straight towards the serpent's wounded head. The creature, sensing the immense power, turned its fury on him, its massive jaws snapping shut with a sound like grinding continents. But Naruto was faster. He twisted in midair, landing on the beast's snout, and plunged the spear of Ryuki deep into the creature's other eye socket. There was a final, earth-shattering roar, and then, silence. The massive body went limp, and the serpent slowly, inexorably, sank back beneath the waves, its life force extinguished. Naruto landed back on the deck, breathing heavily, the crimson aura slowly fading. The fog, as if its master had been defeated, began to dissipate, and the first rays of the rising sun broke through the clouds, bathing the damaged deck in a golden light. The crew stared at him, their faces a mixture of awe, gratitude, and fear. Mai looked down from the crow's nest, her usual mask of boredom completely gone, replaced by a look of undisguised admiration. Tai Li, perched on the broken mast, was simply staring, her heart pounding with an emotion she couldn't quite name. And Azula walked towards him, her perfect composure for once completely gone. Her hair was disheveled, her face was smudged with soot, and there was a cut on her cheek. But her golden eyes burned with an intensity that had nothing to do with anger or pride. It was a look of raw, unadulterated fascination. She stopped in front of him, and for a long moment, they just looked at each other, the unspoken understanding of what they had just accomplished passing between them. "You," she began, her voice hoarse. "You saved us." "We saved us," Naruto corrected, his voice quiet but firm. "I just pointed the way." She shook her head, a slow, deliberate movement. "No, you did more than that. You commanded, and we followed." The admission seemed to cost her a great deal, but she said it nonetheless. There was a new respect in her eyes, a respect for a power that was not just about fire and fury, but about leadership, strategy, and a connection to the world that she could not comprehend. She turned and walked towards the ship's bridge, her stride once again filled with purpose. She barked orders to the stunned crew, assessing the damage, getting the ship under control. Later, Naruto saw her in the map room. He stood in the doorway, watching as she stared at the charts laid out on the table. She looked up, as if sensing his presence. "My father is obsessed with the Avatar," she said, her voice a low murmur. "He believes capturing him is the key to winning this war. But he's wrong." She tapped a finger on a remote, almost mythical chain of islands on the map. "The Dragon's Cradle. Victory isn't won by capturing symbols. It's forged by seizing true power. The kind of power you possess." She straightened up and looked him directly in the eye, her gaze unwavering. "The world thinks the dragons are dead, that their power is a thing of the past. They are wrong. I've seen it now. I've felt it." A slow smile spread across her face, a smile that was no longer just sharp edges, but held a hint of genuine, dangerous excitement. "You are no longer my prisoner, Naruto Uzumaki. You are a new variable in a very old game." She turned back to the map, her finger tracing a new course for the ship. "And I intend to understand every single facet of what you are." Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Gilded Cage of Shujing. The transition from the raw, untamed fury of the open sea to the calculated splendor of Shujing was a form of sensory whiplash. The city did not rise from the ocean so much as it commanded it. It was a breathtaking archipelago of defiance, a series of islands linked by elegant, soaring bridges of white marble and reinforced steel, their arches resembling the graceful curve of a dragon's spine. Buildings, tiered like wedding cakes and adorned with filigrees of gold and jade, climbed towards a sky of brilliant, cloudless azure. Water, tamed and disciplined, flowed through a network of canals, the gondolas that plied them painted in vibrant lacquers, their silent passage a stark contrast to the chaotic waves that had been their world for days. The air itself was different, thick not with salt and ozone, but with the cloying sweetness of jasmine, the sharp tang of exotic spices, and the faint, metallic scent of wealth. As the dragon's talon navigated the intricate channels leading to the main harbor, the sheer, oppressive beauty of the place settled over the ship like a silken shroud. This was the Earth Kingdom, Naruto had been told, yet there was nothing of the stolid, unyielding earth in its design. Shujing was a city of air and water, a testament to what commerce and power could achieve when unshackled from tradition. It was, as Iro murmured beside him at the railing, a beautiful flower with thorns of ambition and roots steeped in secrets. Azula stood at the prow, a living figurehead of imperial power. She had donned a formal court dress of deep crimson and black, her hair intricately pinned with obsidian and gold clasps. Her posture was even more rigid than usual, her gaze sweeping over the approaching city with a proprietary air. This was a different kind of battlefield, and she was dressed for a different kind of war. "Behold, Naruto," she said, her voice carrying a note of theatricality that grated on his nerves. "The jewel of the Earth Kingdom coast. A city that values profit above patriotism, making it pliable." "It looks expensive," Naruto observed, his own simple tunic feeling woefully out of place amidst the ostentatious display. "It is the nexus of trade for the entire western seaboard," Azula explained, turning to face him. Her golden eyes were sharp, analytical. "They supply 90% of tea. He refined coal for the Fire Nation's war machine, and they process rare minerals from across the continent. Their loyalty is not to a king, but to the highest bidder." She gestured to the opulent palaces dotting the highest peaks. "We are here as guests of Governor Bao. He is a man of expensive tastes and flexible morality. Officially, this is a diplomatic visit to reaffirm our trade agreements." Unofficially, her voice dropped. "A blade of ice in the warm air, I am here to secure an exclusive contract for a new resource. A mineral called sunstone. It has unique properties for amplifying and focusing heat. So, bigger explosions," Naruto translated flatly. A cold smile touched her lips. "Precisely. Lord Bao is greedy, but he is not a fool. He will try to leverage his position. He will host banquets, stage performances, drown us in luxury and etiquette. It is all a game, a dance of power and influence." She stepped closer, her gaze intense. "And you are my new, unpredictable piece on the board. While I am here, you will be my personal guard. You will be by my side, a silent, powerful reminder of the Fire Nation's reach. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not draw unnecessary attention. Above all, do not embarrass me." Naruto met her imperious gaze with a lazy, unconcerned smile. "You brought me to a giant, shiny city full of rich people, and your first order is, don't draw attention. Princess, have you met me?" Before Azula could deliver the scathing retort that was surely forming, Ty Lee bounced over to them, clapping her hands in delight. She had changed into a light, flowing tunic of pink and green. And she looked like one of the city's exotic flowers come to life. "Isn't it amazing? It's like the whole city is a circus. I bet they have the most wonderful acrobats here. Can we go see a show?" "Azula, please. We are here on official business." Ty Lee, Azula snapped, her annoyance a palpable force. "Not for frivolous entertainment." Mai drifted over, a shadow in the bright sunlight. Her expression as unchanging as the polished jade statues they were passing. "My father is a minister here," she said, her monotone voice cutting through the chatter. "He serves Lord Bao. This city is a prison of pleasantries. I hated it." The statement hung in the air, a small, dark cloud in the otherwise perfect sky. It was the most she had offered about her past, and it gave Naruto a sudden, sharp insight into the girl behind the bored facade. The governor's palace was an exercise in calculated excess. It was perched on the highest island, a sprawling complex of interconnected halls, serene gardens, and cascading waterfalls that seemed to defy gravity. Servants in immaculate silk uniforms bowed low as they entered, their faces impassive masks. The air inside was cool and still, a stark contrast to the vibrant life of the city below. Lord Bao was a man whose physical appearance perfectly matched his reputation. He was round and soft, draped in layers of expensive, embroidered silk that did little to hide his corpulence. His face was a cherubic mask of joviality, with a small, well-groomed mustache and eyes that were small, black, and missed nothing. He greeted them with a wide, oily smile, his hands clasped before his ample belly. "Princess Azula, an unexpected, yet profound honor. My humble city is exalted by your presence." "Lord Bao," Azula replied, her voice a model of formal courtesy. She inclined her head just so, a gesture of respect that conceded nothing. "Your hospitality is as renowned as your business acumen. I trust my visit will be mutually beneficial." The subtext was as thick as the incense smoke that curled in the air. Bao's gaze flickered past Azula to her companions. He gave Ty Lee a cursory glance, dismissed Mai with a blink, but his eyes lingered on Naruto. He took in the strange, foreign clothes, the confident and utterly unimpressed posture, and the faint, almost imperceptible aura of power that clung to him. "And this is Naruto Uzumaki," Azula said, her voice smooth as silk. My personal bodyguard. His skills are unique. Indeed, Bao murmured, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. He clapped his hands, and a young woman stepped forward from the shadows. She was beautiful, with the delicate, painted features of a porcelain doll. Her dark hair was a marvel of intricate braids and jade pins, and her silk gown, the color of a spring sky, was a masterpiece of the tailor's art. May I present my daughter, Hannah? She will see to it that your stay is comfortable. Lady Hannah performed a deep, graceful bow. Princess, she said, her voice a soft, musical chime. When she rose, her eyes, dark and curious, immediately found Naruto's. Welcome to Shujing, Master Uzumaki. It is rare we see a new face with such vitality. Her smile was overt, a stark contrast to the city's undercurrent of veiled intentions. Naruto, ignoring Azula's silent fume, gave Hannah a slight bow of his own. Thank you for the welcome, Lady Hannah. I hope not to be too much trouble. Oh, I have a feeling you will be a delightful amount of trouble, she replied, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, a clear invitation. Azula's hand on Naruto's arm was a subtle but unmistakable warning, her fingers gripping with the strength of a vice. My guard requires no special attention, she stated, her voice dangerously sweet. He is perfectly content to remain in the background. The initial meeting set the tone for the day. Azula was swept away into a series of closed-door negotiations, with Lord Bao, a battle of wills waged with polite smiles and veiled threats. Left to their own devices, the rest of the group found themselves adrift in the gilded cage of the palace. Tai Li, true to her nature, found the palace gardens. It was a sprawling wonderland of exotic plants, koi-filled ponds, and artfully placed rock formations. She quickly drew a crowd of off-duty guards and curious servants as she began to practice her acrobatic routines. Her lithe body a blur of motion against the serene backdrop. She wasn't just showing off. She was releasing the pent-up energy that the palace's stifling formality had coiled within her. Naruto watched her for a time, leaning against a carved moon gate. He saw the genuine joy she took in her own physicality, the way she fed off the applause and gasps of her small audience. It was a pure, uncomplicated expression of self that he found himself admiring. She noticed him watching and, with a final, spectacular backflip that earned a round of applause, she bounded over to him. Her face flushed and her eyes bright. See, I told you this place could be fun. You just have to make your own. She leaned in, her aura of cheerful energy a palpable thing. It's better tea. Han standing around looking serious all day. You should try smiling. I bet it would look good on you. I'm smiling on the inside, Naruto deadpanned, though a genuine smile tugged at the corner of his lips. I wouldn't want to break the princess's don't draw attention rule. Tai Li giggled. That rule is impossible. You're like a thunderstorm in a tea house. People are going to notice. She looked at him, her head tilted. A flicker of something more serious in her expression. Azula is different around you. I've never seen her lose a game of pie show before. I've never seen her get so angry and so focused on one person. It's weird. I'm a new variable, Naruto said, echoing the princess's own words. You're more than that, Tai Li said softly, before her bright smile returned. You're interesting. She playfully poked him in the chest, right on a pressure point, but with no force behind it. Don't let Azula scare you. Her bark is way worse than her bite, most of the time. He left her to her audience and went in search of Mai. He found her not in the opulent halls or gardens, but on a small, secluded balcony overlooking the city's industrial sector. The view here was not of palaces and serene canals, but of smokestacks, foundries, and the crowded, less glamorous districts where the city's real work was done. She was staring out at the haze, her shoulders slumped, the picture of melancholy. Quite a view, Naruto said, announcing his presence. She didn't flinch, as if she had known he was there all along. It's the only honest view in the whole city, she replied, her voice flat. Everything else is a lie wrapped in gold leaf. She was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on a specific, large estate in the distance. That was my home. My room was the one with the round window. My father made me practice throwing knives for 6 hours a day. Not for self-defense. For discipline. He said a proper lady of the Fire Nation should have a poised and deadly hobby. Naruto leaned against the railing next to her. He didn't offer empty platitudes or tell her he understood. He just listened. I used to sneak out at night, she continued, her voice a low murmur, almost as if she were speaking to herself. I'd climb down the ivy trellis and just walk. I learned the whole city. The back alleys, the rooftops, the smugglers' docks. I learned where the real people lived. The ones who weren't playing a part. She finally turned to look at him, her dark eyes searching his. Do you want to get out of this cage for a while? See the real Shujing. It was an offer of trust. A glimpse behind the curtain of her apathy. Lead the way, Naruto said without hesitation. Getting out of the palace was laughably easy for someone with Mai's skills. She led him through a series of servant passages, down a forgotten spiral staircase, and out through a small, unguarded gate that opened onto the city's lower levels. The moment they stepped out, the atmosphere changed completely. The air was thick with the smell of grilling meats, unwashed bodies, and saltwater. The sounds were a chaotic symphony of merchants hawking their wares, children shouting, and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Here, Mai was different. She moved with a quiet confidence, her steps sure and her eyes alert. She was no longer a bored noble's daughter, but a creature of the city's shadows. She pointed out the best place to get meat buns, the stall run by a man who was also the city's most notorious information broker, the hidden alley that served as a shortcut to the docks. They found themselves in a rundown teahouse near the harbor, a place filled with grizzled sailors and shady-looking merchants. It was a world away from the serene tea ceremonies in Iroh's company. They sat at a rickety table in a dark corner, and Mai seemed to relax for the first time since they'd arrived. Why show me this? Naruto asked, taking a bite of a surprisingly delicious, spicy meat bun. Mai took a slow sip of her tea. Because you're not like them, she said simply. You look at people, you don't just see their titles or their clothes. You saw me on the ship. No one ever does that. She looked down at her cup. And I don't trust Bao. My father complains about him constantly. He says Bao is playing a dangerous game, promising the same resources to multiple buyers. He's dealing with Fire Nation officials, Earth Kingdom loyalists, even pirates from the Crimson Fleet. This was valuable intelligence, a piece of the puzzle Azula was trying to solve with brute force and intimidation. Why tell me and not Azula? Naruto asked. Because Azula would use the information like a club, Mai said, her voice laced with a bitter certainty. She'd march in there, make accusations, and probably burn half the palace down. She doesn't understand subtlety. You do. You proved that with the pie show game. You see the whole board. Their quiet conversation was interrupted by a loud crash from the other side of the room. A group of burly, drunken sailors had decided to take exception to a smaller merchant who had apparently spilled a drink on their leader. Threats were being made, fists were being clenched. Naruto sighed. Trouble seems to follow me around. You walk towards it, Mai countered, a ghost of a smile on her lips. Before Naruto could get up, Mai moved. She was a blur of dark cloth and glinting steel. She didn't throw her knives. Instead, she used her speed and precision to disarm and disable. A flick of her wrist sent a mug flying from one sailor's hand. A précis. Say jab with the pommel of a stiletto to a nerve cluster in another's arm made him yelp and drop his weapon. In seconds, the three sailors were disarmed and off balance, staring in shock at the slender, bored-looking girl who had just dismantled their aggression with contemptuous ease. You should clean up your mess, she said to the merchant, her voice flat, before turning and walking back to their table as if nothing had happened. The sailors, humiliated and suddenly sober, decided to find another place to drink. Naruto looked at her with newfound admiration. Nice work. It's just discipline, she said, the word dripping with sarcasm. Come on, we should get back before Azula decides to send a search party. They returned to the palace using the same secret route, their shared excursion a silent bond between them. That evening was the grand banquet. The main hall had been transformed into a kaleidoscope of color and sound. Silk banners hung from the high, vaulted ceilings. Musicians played a haunting, ethereal melody on strange instruments. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meats and expensive perfumes. The elite of Shujing were all there, a sea of nobles and wealthy merchants dressed in their finest. Their laughter brittle and their smiles carefully constructed. Naruto stood by Azula's side, dressed in a formal black and red tunic they had provided for him. It was well made but felt like a costume. Azula was a vision of imperial perfection, her crimson dress shimmering in the lantern light, her expression a mask of cool, regal grace. She was playing her part perfectly. Exchanging pleasantries with nobles, her every word a carefully chosen move in her diplomatic game. But Naruto could feel the tension radiating from her, the tight coil of frustration beneath the flawless exterior. Her negotiations with Bao were not going well. As predicted, Lady Hana made a beeline for Naruto. "Master Uzumaki, you look so stoic and handsome tonight," she gushed, her fan fluttering coyly. "My father's banquets are so terribly dull. Please, entertain me with a story of your travels." "My travels have been mostly wet and stormy lately," Naruto replied, his lips twitching in a smile. Not much of a story there. His simple, direct honesty seemed to charm her even more. "Oh, a man of mystery. I like that." Azula's smile tightened by a fraction of a millimeter, IGN of displeasure only someone watching her as closely as Naruto would notice. "Lady Hana, I'm sure my guard has no stories that would be appropriate for your delicate ears." The possessive, "my guard," was emphasized just enough to be a clear warning. The verbal sparring was interrupted by Lord Bao, who clapped his hands for attention. "My friends, Princess Azula, in honor of our esteemed guests, I propose a bit of entertainment. A demonstration of skill from the finest talents in our city." What followed was a parade of performers. A firebender who could juggle flames with astonishing dexterity. An earthbender who sculpted a soaring phoenix from a block of marble. A woman who sang an aria so pure and beautiful it brought tears to the eyes of the nobles. Then, Lord Bao's oily gaze landed on Naruto. "And now, perhaps the princess's unique bodyguard would honor us. We are all so curious about the skills that merit the personal protection of the Fire Nation's royalty." It was a challenge. A political move designed to put Azula on the spot. To refuse would be an insult. To accept was to risk revealing too much. The entire hall fell silent, all eyes on them. Azula looked at Naruto, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. This was off script, an unexpected move she hadn't anticipated. Naruto gave her a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. He stepped forward into the center of the hall. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't assume a fighting stance. He simply stood there, his hands loose at his sides. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, the only sound was the distant music and the nervous shifting of the crowd. Then he took a breath. He reached out with his senses, feeling the life force, the Ryuki, in everything around him. He felt the people, their curiosity, their fear, their ambition. He felt the ancient stone of the palace floors, the water in the decorative fountains, the dormant seeds in the potted plants that lined the hall. He chose the plants, a collection of small, barren, withered-looking miniature trees in ornate pots, meant to be artistic representations of winter. He slowly raised his hands, palms up. A soft, crimson glow, warm and inviting, emanated from his skin. It was not the violent, explosive energy he had used against the serpent. This was a gentle, nurturing warmth, a controlled and focused life force. He channeled the Ryuki, not into a blast of power, but into a delicate, intricate flow. He pushed it into the dry, dead-looking soil of the pots. The crowd gasped. Before their eyes, the withered trees began to change. Tiny green buds appeared on the gnarled, black branches. The buds swelled, unfurled, and became vibrant, green leaves. And then, they blossomed. Small, perfect flowers of impossible color, crimson, gold, and sapphire blue, erupted into full bloom. Their fragrance filling the hall, a scent of pure, unadulterated life. In less than a minute, he had transformed a display of artistic death into an explosion of impossible life. He lowered his hands, the crimson glow fading. The silence that followed was absolute, a shared moment of awe and disbelief. He had not demonstrated a skill of war or destruction. He had demonstrated the power of creation. It was a display of control so profound, so utterly alien to them, that it was more terrifying than any feat of firebending. He had not only met Bao's challenge, he had transcended it. He walked back to Azula's side, his face calm. He glanced at her. Her mask was gone. She was staring at him, her lips slightly parted, her golden eyes wide with a mixture of emotions he couldn't begin to decipher: awe, disbelief, jealousy, and a raw, burning curiosity that overshadowed them all. She had called his power sloppy and untamed. He had just shown her a level of finesse she couldn't have even imagined. The banquet ended shortly after. The mood had shifted. Lord Bao was no longer smug and in control, he was pale and unnerved. The nobles gave them a wide berth. The power Naruto had demonstrated was not something they could understand or quantify, and it frightened them. Later that night, Azula summoned him to her private chambers. She was standing on the balcony, staring out at the lantern-lit city. She had dismissed her attendants. They were alone. "What you did tonight," she began, her voice tight, controlled. "That was not just a trick." "No," Naruto confirmed. "It wasn't. You made a fool of Bao. You made a fool of me," she said, turning to face him. The moonlight cast sharp shadows on her face, making her look both beautiful and dangerous. "I told you not to draw attention. He called me out," Naruto said calmly. "It was a challenge to you, through me. I answered it. Your reputation is not only intact, it's enhanced. Now they see you travel not just with a guard, but with a miracle worker. That gives you more leverage, not less." She stared at him, her mind clearly working, re-evaluating, recalculating everything she thought she knew about him. "You deliberately disobeyed my order. To help me." The concept seemed foreign to her. "I see the whole board, remember," he said, echoing their pie show game. "Sometimes you have to sacrifice a piece to win." She took a step closer, her eyes searching his. The anger was still there, but it was now mingled with a grudging respect and a profound, unsettling fascination. "What are you, Naruto Uzumaki? A sage, a demon, a god?" "I'm just a man a long way from a home I can't remember," he said, the honest answer surprising even himself. Her gaze was intense, a physical force. "You are a source of immense, untapped power. And power is the only thing that matters in this world." She reached out, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, her touch surprisingly gentle. "And I," she whispered, her voice a low, dangerous purr, "will be the one to understand it." The moment was broken by a soft sound from the shadows of the room. Mai stepped forward, her face impassive, but her eyes were fixed on Azula's hand on Naruto's face. "Bao is sending a message," she said, her voice cutting through the charged atmosphere. "I overheard his couriers. It's not for the Fire Lord. It's for the Crimson Fleet." Azula's hand dropped. Her focus shifted instantly from Naruto to this new threat, her mind once again a razor-sharp weapon. The game in Shujing had just become infinitely more complicated, and the unpredictable piece she had brought with her was now, more than ever, the center of the board. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Crimson Tide and the Dragon's Roar. The air in Azula's chambers, once charged with a dangerous, intimate tension, had flash frozen into the crystalline stillness of a war room. Mai's words, "It's for the Crimson Fleet," had acted as a solvent, dissolving the complex emotional alchem. Why between Naruto and Azula and replacing it with the cold, hard calculus of survival and strategy. Azula had not recoiled or shown surprise. The mask of the calculating princess had slammed back into place with an audible click. Her golden eyes narrowing, her entire being sharpening into a single point of lethal focus. "Bao is a fool," she hissed, her voice a low and venomous thing. She began to pace the length of the balcony, her silk dress whispering against the marble floor. She was a caged tiger, the confines of diplomacy suddenly too small for the rage building within her. To betray the Fire Nation is suicide. To do it for a band of disorganized sea rats is an insult. "They're not that disorganized," Mai countered, her voice retaining its usual flat affect, yet carrying an undertone of authority that made Azula pause. "The Crimson Fleet controls nearly all the unregulated shipping lanes from here to the Serpent's Pass. They're pirates, but they have a command structure, a fleet of modified warships, and their leader, Captain Kato, is rumored to be a powerful waterbender. They're a plague the Fire Nation has been trying to eradicate for a decade." Naruto watched the exchange, impressed. This was no longer about a simple trade deal. It was about espionage, treason, and the delicate balance of power in a region the Fire Nation only nominally controlled through economic pressure. He stepped away from the railing, drawing the attention of both women. He's not just a fool, he's a desperate one. He wouldn't risk this unless he thought he could get away with it. He's overconfident. That's his weakness. Azula stopped pacing and turned to him, her expression a mixture of irritation and grudging respect. And what, precisely, do you propose, my miracle worker? Shall we turn his decorative trees into an avenging forest? We need proof, Naruto said, ignoring her sarcasm. Hard proof. Something you can take to your father that proves Bao's treason beyond any doubt. Something that gives you the justification to do whatever you need to do. And how do we get this proof? Azula challenged, crossing her arms. Bao's palace is a fortress of pleasantries. Every servant is a spy, every wall has ears. It was Mai who answered. We don't get it here. She moved to the large, ornate map of Shujing that hung on the wall, a tapestry of silk and embroidered thread. A deal of this magnitude won't be made in the palace. It's too risky. It will be done on neutral ground. A place with enough crowds to provide cover, but enough privacy for a clandestine meeting. Her slender finger traced a path from the palace down to the bustling harbor district. She tapped a specific location, a building that seemed to be carved into the very cliff face overlooking the sea. The Jade Lion. It's the most famous tea house and gambling den in the city. Owned by a syndicate that answers to no one. Bao's influence ends at the door. It's the perfect place for a secret to be sold. Azula studied the map, her sharp mind processing the tactical implications. A public venue. Infiltrating it will be difficult. An open assault is out of the question, it would be a political disaster. An open assault isn't my style anyway, Naruto said, a confident smirk spreading across his face. This is a stealth mission. Mai and I go in. We find the meeting, we get the proof. You, he looked directly at Azula. Do what you do best. You play the part. Keep Bao occupied. Host a tea ceremony. Request a poetry reading. Do whatever it takes to keep his eyes on you and not on his collapsing house of cards. You want to leave me behind to arrange flowers while you play spy. Azula's voice was dangerously low. I want you to command the board while I move the pieces, Naruto corrected her smoothly. Your role is just as important. If Bao suspects anything, the whole thing is blown. You're the only one who can hold his attention, the only one he's truly afraid of. The subtle flattery, grounded in strategic truth, seemed to mollify her. Her pride was a delicate and powerful instrument, and Naruto was quickly learning how to play it. And what about me? A cheerful voice piped up from the doorway. Tai Li stood there, holding a tray with a pot of tea and 3 cups. She must have been on her way to join them when the crisis broke. Her usual bright smile was tinged with concern, her wide eyes darting between the 3 tense figures. I'm not very good at being quiet, and I'm even worse at poetry. Before Azula could dismiss her, Naruto had an idea. No, he said, you have the most important job of all. He walked over to the map. The Jade Lion is here. Mai and I will be inside. Azula will be here, at the palace. That leaves a lot of ground in between. You, Tai Li, are our link. You're faster and more agile than any messenger. You can cross the rooftops of this city like it's a playground. You'll be our eyes and ears. You'll watch the palace, you'll watch the tea house. If something goes wrong, if we need to get a message to Azula, you're the only one who can do it in time. A slow, brilliant smile spread across Tai Li's face. He hadn't just given her a task, he had recognized her unique talents and made them essential to the mission's success. He had seen her as a vital component, not a frivolous accessory. A rooftop race across the city. I can definitely do that, she chirped, her energy and confidence fully restored. And so, the plan was set. An unlikely council of war, a princess, a sage, a knife thrower, and an acrobat, had been formed in the heart of enemy territory. As they finalized the details, Iro entered, his presence a calming balm in the tense atmosphere. He had clearly overheard enough to understand the situation. He looked at their determined faces, a thoughtful, sad smile on his own. It is a terrible thing when a beautiful city forces you to move through its shadows, he said softly. He looked at Mai's finger, still resting on the Jade Lion on the map. Be careful in that place. The tea is overpriced, and the men who drink it are steeped in betrayal. But, he added, his eyes twinkling, they have a white dragon bush tea that is simply divine, if you get the chance. It was his way of offering both a warning and his blessing. As the moon climbed high over the glittering city, the mission began. Azula, a vision of regal composure, initiated a late-night game of pie show with a visibly reluctant Lord Bao, her every move on the board a subtle reminder of her earlier victory, a psychological anchor designed to keep his focus firmly on her. Tai Li, a whisper of pink and green, melted into the shadows of the palace gardens, her ascent to the rooftops as silent and effortless as a moth taking flight. Naruto and Mai, cloaked in dark, nondescript travel gear, navigated the labyrinthine back alleys of Shujing. The city at night was a different beast entirely. The opulent facades of the buildings gave way to crumbling brickwork, arcade and overflowing refuse bins in the narrow service corridors. The air, once perfumed, now smelled of stale beer, cooking oil, and desperation. Mai moved through this underbelly with a familiar grace, her knowledge of the city's secret passages a tangible advantage. I feel like I've seen more of this city's garbage than its gardens, Naruto murmured as they squeezed through a narrow gap between two buildings. The garbage is more honest, Mai replied, not breaking her stride. There was a new energy to her, a focused intensity. She was in her element here, far from the stifling expectations of the court. She was not just a participant in this mission, she was its architect. The Jade Lion was an architectural marvel and a security nightmare. It was a 5-story pagoda built directly into the cliffside, its curved roofs adorned with jade green tiles that shimmered in the moonlight. Each story had a wide, wrap-around balcony that overlooked the harbor, where the ships of the Crimson Fleet were now brazenly docked. The sounds of raucous laughter, clinking tiles from the gambling tables, and the plaintive notes of a stringed instrument spilled out into the night. Security is tight at the main entrance, Mai whispered, pointing to 2 hulking guards in the livery of the Tea House Syndicate. They check for weapons, but they're focused on what comes in the front door, not what comes in from the sky. She led him to a darkened alley behind the tea house. Above them, a series of decorative stone ledges and carvings provided a treacherous ladder up the cliff face, leading to the balconies of the upper floors. It was a climb that would be impossible for most. For them, it was just a doorway. Naruto went first. He channeled a small, controlled amount of Ryuki into his hands and feet, allowing them to adhere to the stone surfaces with a faint, magnetic pull. He moved up the cliff with the silent, unnatural grace of a gecko. Mai followed, her lithe body finding purchase in the smallest of cracks and ledges. Her movements economical and precise. They were a study in contrasting styles, his raw, mystical power, her disciplined, human skill, but the result was the same. They slipped over the railing of the 3rd-floor balcony, melting into the shadows behind a large, potted bamboo tree. This floor was dedicated to high-stakes gambling. The air was thick with smoke and tension. Wealthy merchants and off-duty sea captains hunched over pie show and dice games, their fortunes hanging on the turn of a card or the roll of an ivory cube. Naruto closed his eyes, extending his senses. He filtered out the cacophony of emotions in the room, the greed, the hope, the despair, and searched for a specific signature. He was looking for the cold, calculating ambition of Bao's people and the brash, violent energy of the pirates. He found it. 4th floor. Private room in the back, overlooking the sea. They moved through the gambling hall like ghosts. Mai's practiced indifference made her invisible. Just another face in the crowd. Naruto used a subtle Ryuki technique, a gentle push on the perceptions of those around them, making them seem uninteresting, their eyes sliding right past him. They ascended a carved wooden staircase to the 4th floor, which was reserved for private parties and business dealings. The hallway was quieter here, patrolled by a single, bored-looking guard. Mai casually produced a small, weighted pouch from her sleeve. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed it down the hallway in the opposite direction. It landed with a soft, metallic clink. The guard, his boredom momentarily forgotten, grumbled and went to investigate the sound. It was the only opening they needed. They slipped down the hall and pressed themselves into the alcove beside the target door. From inside, they could hear the low murmur of voices. Naruto placed his palm flat against the wooden door, closing his eyes and channeling a sliver of Ryuki into the wood, turning it into a sensitive diaphragm. The voices became clear, as if he were in the room with them. The sunstone is only the beginning, a sycophantic voice, one of Bao's ministers, was saying. Lord Bao is prepar. Ed to offer you something far more valuable. The Fire Nation's naval patrol schedules for the next 3 months. Their routes, their supply ships, their moments of vulnerability. A second voice, deeper and rougher, with a self-satisfied chuckle, replied. Now you're speaking my language. Schedules are good, but plunder is better. My men have expensive tastes. What assurances do I have that your Governor won't get cold feet when the Fire Navy starts asking questions? Lord Bao is fully committed to this new partnership, the minister assured him. He has even prepared a signed and sealed contract, detailing the terms of our arrangement. 50% of all recovered assets. This was it, the smoking gun, a signed contract of treason. We need that contract, Naruto whispered to Mai. Mai nodded, her eyes dark and serious. She drew 2 slender stilettos from her sleeves, the steel whispering as it left its sheaths. She was ready for a fight. But Naruto had another idea. He looked at the ornate tea set that had been left on a serving trolley outside the room. A fresh pot of jasmine tea, still steaming. He picked up the pot, a slow, wicked grin spreading across his face. I think their negotiations are about to get a little sleepy. He focused a minuscule amount of Ryuki into the tea, not the vibrant energy of life he had used on the plants, but its opposite. A dull, draining, soporific pulse. It was a technique that required immense control, the spiritual equivalent of a potent sedative. He then knocked briskly on the door. After a moment of silence, the door creaked open, and a large pirate guard peered out. What do you want? Naruto smiled his most disarming, idiotic smile. Room service. Complimentary jasmine tea for the esteemed guests of the Jade Lion. The guard grunted, looked at the steaming pot, and, seeing no threat, opened the door to let him in. Mai slipped in behind him, a shadow in his wake. The room was opulent, with silk cushions and a large, low table. Bao's minister and a powerfully built man with a wild mane of black hair and a cruel smile, Captain Kato, were sitting at the table. A rolled-up scroll, sealed with Bao's personal crest, lay between them. 2 more pirate guards stood by the window. We didn't order tea, Kato growled, his hand moving towards the hilt of a wicked-looking cutlass at his belt. The manager insists, Naruto said cheerfully, beginning to pour the tea into their cups. As he poured, he allowed his sedative-laced Ryuki to flow more strongly, the invisible energy mingling with the steam, filling the small room with a wave of profound lethargy. The minister, a man of weak will and weaker constitution, was the first to succumb. His eyes glazed over, and he slumped forward onto the table with a soft thud. The guards looked confused, their movements suddenly sluggish. Kato fought it, his waterbender's constitution stronger than the others. He pushed himself to his feet, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. What is this? He slurred, drawing his cutlass. That was Mai's cue. She moved with silent, lethal grace. A flick of her wrist, and a single, perfectly thrown Senbon needle embedded itself in the nerve cluster of Kato's sword hand. He cried out, his fingers going numb, and the cutlass clattered to the floor. Before the other guards could even process what was happening, Mai was on them, her stilettos used not to kill, but to disable, striking pressure points and joint locks with inhuman precision. Both men crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Kato staggered back, clutching his numb hand, his eyes wide with a mixture of rage and disbelief. He was a formidable warrior, a captain of a pirate fleet, and he had been taken down without a single drop of blood being shed. Naruto walked over to the table and picked up the scroll. Treason, signed and sealed, he said, tucking it securely into his tunic. I think our work here is done. But it was never that easy. As they turned to leave, the door to the balcony burst open. And a dozen more pirates, armed to the teeth, poured into the room. They had been seen. The trap was sprung. No one steals from Captain Kato. The pirate captain roared, his lethargy burned away by pure adrenaline. He thrust his good hand towards the decorative fountain in the corner of the room, and the water within it exploded outwards, forming a series of sharp, icy projectiles that shot towards Naruto and Mai. Naruto reacted instantly. He grabbed Mai, spun her behind him, and slammed his palm onto the floor. A dome of solid, crimson Ryuki erupted around them, the ice spikes shattering harmlessly against its surface. Time for Plan B, he grunted. The fight spilled out onto the balconies of the Jade Lion. It was chaos. Alarms were ringing. Patrons were screaming and fleeing. Pirates swarmed from every floor, their curved blades flashing in the moonlight. Naruto and Mai fought back to back, a whirlwind of crimson energy and glinting steel. Mai's precision was the perfect complement to Naruto's overwhelming power. She would create openings, disabling an opponent's weapon arm or leg, and he would follow through with a concussive blast of Ryuk. That would send them flying over the railing and into the harbor below. On the rooftops above, Ty Lee saw the eruption of violence. Without a moment's hesitation, she took off, leaping from eave to eave. Her movements a breathtaking display of acrobatic skill. She was a silent messenger, a streak of motion against the moonlit sky, racing back towards the palace. The battle on the balconies was turning against them. There were too many pirates. Kato, now recovered, was proving to be a formidable opponent. He drew water directly from the harbor, shaping it into massive, crushing fists and ling whips that smashed through the balcony railings. Naruto was forced onto the defensive, his Ryuki shields cracking under the relentless assault. "We need an exit," Mai shouted, narrowly dodging a pirate's blade. "I'm working on it," Naruto yelled back, unleashing a wave of energy that cleared a temporary path. It was then that the tide of the battle turned. From the direction of the main harbor entrance, a brilliant blue flame cut a swath through the pirate ranks. Azula had arrived. She was not in her court dress, but in her light, flexible battle armor, her face a mask of cold, beautiful fury. Behind her were 20 of the Fire Nation's finest soldiers, their movements disciplined and deadly. And leaping and cartwheeling ahead of them was Ty Lee, a cheerful angel of death, her precise jabs and strikes neutralizing the pirates' elite guards before they could even react, their bodies collapsing in limp, helpless heaps. "You seem to be having some trouble," Azula called out to Naruto. Her voice dripping with condescending amusement as she incinerated a pirate who was foolish enough to charge her. "I thought you had this under control." "We got the proof," Naruto yelled back, deflecting a water whip from Kato. Just providing a distraction until the cavalry arrived. The battle became a three-way melee. The pirates, caught between Naruto and Mai on the balconies and Azula's forces below, fought with the desperation of cornered animals. Bao's city guard finally arrived, but seeing the chaos and the presence of the Fire Nation princess, they seemed content to form a perimeter and watch. Their loyalty clearly not worth dying for. Naruto knew he had to end it. He had to take down Kato. He met the pirate captain on the main bridge connecting the Jade Lion to the harbor front. Kato grinned, a feral, wolfish expression. "You've got spirit, boy. But you're in my domain now." He raised his arms, and a massive wave of water, a veritable tsunami, rose from the harbor, to crash down and sweep them all away. Naruto didn't try to block it. He didn't erect a shield. He took a deep, centering breath, planting his feet on the bridge. He gathered all the Ryuki within him, not into his fists, but into his lungs. He felt the power of the dragon sage, the ancient, primal energy that was his birthright. The air around him shimmered with a crimson heat. As Kato brought the wave crashing down, Naruto unleashed his power. It was not a blast of energy. It was a sound, a roar, a pure, concussive wave of spiritual energy that tore through the air. It was the roar of a dragon. A sound of absolute authority and overwhelming power that shook the very foundations of the city. The massive wave of water didn't just stop, it atomized, dissolving into a harmless cloud of mist and steam. The roar slammed into Kato, not as a physical blow, but as a spiritual one. He was thrown back, his waterbending broken, his senses shattered, his consciousness snuffed out like a candle in a hurricane. He collapsed in a heap, utterly defeated. The rest of the pirates, their leader fallen, their morale shattered by the impossible sound, threw down their weapons and surrendered. In the aftermath, Azula stood before Lord Bao in his own throne room. The rising sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Bao was pale and sweating, his jovial mask completely gone. Naruto, Mai, and Ty Lee stood behind Azula, a silent, intimidating audience. Iro was there as well, a quiet observer sipping a cup of tea. Azula did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She unrolled the scroll Naruto had recovered and placed it on the table before Bao. "Your signature, I believe," she said, her voice as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. Bao crumpled. His ambition, his power, his entire world, dissolved in the face of that single piece of parchment. Azula was magnificent in her victory. She was not the raging inferno Naruto had first met. She was a controlled, precise flame. She had Bao arrested for treason. She seized his assets, including the Sunstone mines, in the name of the Fire Nation. And in a move of brilliant political acumen, she appointed Mai's estranged father as the new governor of Shujing, citing his long and underappreciated loyalty. She had not just neutralized a threat, she had converted an entire city into a loyal asset and, in the process, had given Mai an unexpected and complex resolution to her painful history with the place. As they prepared to depart on the dragon's talon, Mai stood on the deck, looking at the city. For the first time, her expression was not one of boredom or melancholy, but of a quiet, thoughtful peace. Her father was now in power, and perhaps, for the first time, she had a reason to not hate her past. Ty Lee was practicing a new acrobatic routine with some of the crew, her laughter echoing across the water. She had proven her worth, and she radiated a new, quiet confidence. Azula found Naruto at the prow, watching the last of Shujing's glittering towers recede into the distance. Your plan, she admitted, her voice low so only he could hear, was effective. Your methods are unconventional, but they produce results. Teamwork, Naruto said with a smile. You should try it more often. She didn't dignify that with a response. Instead, she looked out at the open sea. Kato was a nuisance, but he was just a symptom of a larger disease. This war is being fought on multiple fronts, not just with armies. There is a cancer of corruption within the Earth Kingdom, and I intend to cut it out. There was a new fire in her eyes, not just the fire of personal ambition, but the first flickering embers of a grander, more terrifying vision. Naruto looked at her, then at Mai and Ty Lee. He had arrived in this world a lost and broken man. Now, he was part of this strange, dangerous, and compelling crew. He was a sage, a warrior, a strategist, and the anchor for this volatile group of powerful women. He still didn't know who he was, or where he had come from. But for the first time since he had woken up on that storm-swept beach, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Temple of Echoing Souls. The days following their departure from Shujing were marked by a strange and unfamiliar calm. The sea, as if exhausted by its earlier fury, was a placid sheet of turquoise. And the sky was a vast, unbroken canvas of blue. The disciplined rhythm of life aboard the Dragon's Talon returned, yet the atmosphere had irrevocably shifted. The crew, who had once viewed Naruto with a mixture of fear and suspicion, now treated him with a profound, almost reverential respect. They had seen him command the elements, shatter a tsunami with a shout, and stand as an equal to their formidable princess. He was no longer just a curiosity, he was a legend in the making. The most significant change, however, was within the command structure itself, the volatile four-person nucleus that now dictated the ship's course. The rigid hierarchy, with Azula at its undisputed apex, had fractured and begun to reform into something more complex, more organic. Their shared trial by fire in Shujing had forged them into a unit, their individual skills synergizing in a way that none of them, least of all Azula, had anticipated. They now gathered in the map room not as a princess and her subordinates, but as a council of war, their disparate voices weaving together a strategy that was far more nuanced and formidable than Azula's previous doctrine of overwhelming force. It was during one such meeting, while examining the spoils of their victory, that the next thread of their journey was unspooled. Iro, who had been quietly perusing the captured Pira Te logs and the treasonous contract from Bao, let out a soft, thoughtful hum. He held up the scroll, its edges slightly singed from the chaos of the battle. It is fascinating, he mused, his finger racing a pattern on the parchment's border. Lord Bao's calligraphy is as ostentatious as his palace, yet the scribe who drafted the finer points of the contract used an ink with a very peculiar composition. He brought the scroll to his nose and sniffed. Iron oxide, crushed lapis lazuli, and a faint, almost floral scent. The ink of the Shio-Su monks, a reclusive order who vanished centuries ago. Azula, who had been outlining potential naval routes to intercept rogue Crimson Fleet vessels, looked up, her interest piqued. Monks, what do they have to do with pirates and treasonous governors? Perhaps nothing, Iro conceded. Or perhaps, everything. The Shiosu were not just scribes, they were cartographers of the spiritual world. They believed that ley lines of power, channels of natural energy, crisscrossed the globe like veins on a leaf. Their maps did not show mountains and rivers, but the flow of life force itself. He unrolled an ancient, yellowed sea chart from his own collection and laid it beside the contract. According to their legends, the most powerful of these ley lines, which they called the Ryu Mayaku, or Dragon's Vein, all converged on a single, sacred location. A place they called the Ruganji, the Temple of the Dragon's Soul. As he spoke the name, Naruto felt a strange resonance deep within his being, a low thrum like a forgotten melody. The fragmented memories in his mind stirred, not forming a clear picture, but a feeling, a sense of profound, ancient belonging. This is a waste of time, Azula scoffed, though her eyes remained fixed on the old map. Fairy tales and spiritual nonsense will not win this war. Perhaps not, Iro said gently. But the Shiosu monks were said to be the first to commune with the dragons, to learn to harness the world's natural energy. They were the precursors to the Sun Warriors, the original masters of the fire within. He looked directly at Naruto. They were the first to learn of Ryuki. He then pointed to a small, almost invisible symbol on the contract, hidden within the decorative border. It was a stylized dragon, coiled in an eternal circle. It matched a symbol on the ancient map, marking a location in a treacherous, mist-shrouded archipelago known only as the Widow's Coil. Bao and Kato were not just trading in weapons and schedules. This ink, this symbol, they were trading in knowledge. Knowledge of a power source that could make Sunstone look like a child's toy. The implication hung heavy in the air. A power source linked to the dragons, to Naruto's own forgotten past. For Azula, it was the ultimate prize. A weapon that could ensure her victory and secure her place in history. For Naruto, it was something more. It was a key, a chance to unlock the prison of his amnesia and understand the nature of the power that flowed through his veins. Set a course, Azula commanded the helmsman, her voice ringing with a renewed, fanatical purpose. There was no argument, no dissent. The destination was set. The Widow's Coil lived up to its name. It was a graveyard of ships, a maze of jagged, tooth-like sea stacks perpetually shrouded in a thick, unnerving fog that muffled sound and played tricks on the eye. The water was a strange, milky green and unnaturally calm, the silence broken only by the drip of condensation from the ship's rigging and the mournful cry of unseen birds. Compasses spun uselessly, and the crew grew increasingly unnerved, whispering tales of ghost ships and sailors lured to their doom. Only Naruto seemed unaffected. He stood at the prow, his eyes closed, one hand resting on the wooden railing. He was not navigating by sight, but by feel, a homing beacon in his soul pulling him towards the heart of the archipelago. There, he said, pointing into a seemingly impenetrable wall of fog. Through that passage, the entrance is hidden. Guided by his senses, the dragon's talon navigated the treacherous, narrow channel, its hull scraping against unseen rocks. They emerged into a vast, hidden caldera, a secret, tranquil sea at the center of the island maze. And there, in the heart of the caldera, was the temple. It was a sight of breathtaking, impossible beauty. A single, massive structure that seemed to be carved from a mountain of pure, white stone. It was half submerged in the turquoise water, its tiered roofs and elegant spires reaching towards the sky like a prayer. A grand, stone causeway, slick with sea spray and green with age, led from the shore to a massive, circular gate. The architecture was unlike anything they had ever seen, not Fire Nation, not Earth Kingdom. It was older, more elemental, its curves and lines echoing the natural forms of waves, flames, and coiling dragons. The air was thick with a palpable energy, a low hum that vibrated in their bones and made the hairs on their arms stand on end. They disembarked, the five of them, Naruto, Azula, Mai, Ty Lee, and Iro, walking the long causeway in a tense silence. The gate was a masterpiece of ancient engineering, a solid disc of polished obsidian 20 feet high, with no visible handles, hinges, or locks. In its center was a single, intricate carving, the same coiling dragon from the map. "It's sealed," Azula stated, running a hand over the impossibly smooth, cold surface. "No doubt some ancient lock, lost to time." Naruto stepped forward, a sense of deep, instinctual knowledge guiding his actions. "It's not a lock," he said softly. "It's a conduit." He looked at Azula. The monks who built this place understood energy. They knew that some forces need a catalyst to awaken others. He pointed to a small, almost invisible recess in the center of the dragon carving. "Your sunstone. I need to borrow it." Azula, for once, did not argue. She produced the fist-sized, crystalline mineral from a pouch at her belt. It seemed to drink the ambient light, a warm, golden glow pulsing in its depths. Naruto took it, its warmth a familiar sensation, and placed it into the recess. It was a perfect fit. "Now what?" Mai asked, her hand resting on the hilt of a hidden knife. "Now," Naruto said, "we provide the spark." He placed his own palm over the sunstone. Azula, understanding immediately, placed her hand beside his. "It needs both of us," Naruto explained. "The sunstone amplifies heat and energy. Your fire is pure, focused heat. My Ryuki is pure, raw life force. One without the other is just a whisper. Together, they are a storm." He closed his eyes and reached for his power, a torrent of crimson energy flowing from his palm into the stone. Simultaneously, Azula channeled her own energy. A stream of brilliant, blue-hot fire that was not flame, but pure, controlled heat. The sunstone began to glow, first a warm gold, then a searing white. The intricate lines of the dragon carving on the gate began to fill with a blinding, crimson light, the energy spreading through the stone like blood through veins. With a low, resonant groan that seemed to shake the very island, the massive obsidian gate began to retract into the stone archway above, revealing a dark, silent passage leading into the temple's depths. The interior was vast and silent, a cavernous space that seemed to defy the temple's external dimensions. The air was cool and smelled of damp stone, ancient dust, and something else, something clean and electric, like the air after a thunderstorm. Faint, phosphorescent moss grew in the cracks of the stone, casting an ethereal, green-blue light that illuminated murals of breathtaking scale and artistry. They depicted celestial dragons dancing in star-strewn skies, and humanoid figures with glowing crimson auras who communed with them, shaping mountains and parting seas. It was the story of his people, and Naruto stared at it with a mixture of awe and a profound, aching sadness. He was the last chapter of a book he couldn't even read. As they ventured deeper, the temple's energy grew stronger, and its nature became chillingly apparent. It was a place of spiritual resonance, an amplifier of the soul. The silence was not empty. It was filled with whispers that seemed to come from the edge of hearing, echoes of their own thoughts, their own fears. Tai Li was the first to be affected. She paused, her cheerful expression faltering. "Did you guys hear that?" she asked, her voice small. "It sounded like my sisters. They're laughing at me." She shook her head, trying to clear it. "They always said my acrobatics were just a silly way to get attention. That I was running away from being ordinary." "There is no one here, Tai Li," Azula said sharply. Though she too seemed unnerved, her eyes darting into the shadows. "The temple is testing us," Iro said, his voice a low and steady anchor in the oppressive atmosphere. "It is showing us the echoes of our own souls. Do not fight them. Acknowledge them, and let them pass." But the temple's influence was insidious. As they entered a large, circular chamber, Tai Li suddenly cried out, stumbling back. "You're leaving me," she gasped, her eyes wide with terror, though the others stood perfectly still. "Just like everyone else. You think I'm just a silly, useless distraction." In her mind's eye, the others were turning their backs on her, walking away into the darkness, leaving her utterly alone in the vast, silent temple. It was her deepest fear, to be abandoned, to be deemed worthless by the people she wanted so desperately to protect and entertain. Naruto moved to her side instantly. He didn't touch her, but he projected a wave of his own calm, steadying Ryuki. "We're not leaving you, Tai Li," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Look at me. We are right here. Your strength isn't just in your smile. It's in your loyalty. It's in your ability to see the good in people. That's not useless. It's essential." His words, imbued with the sincerity of his own energy, cut through the illusion. Tai Li blinked, the terror in her eyes receding, replaced by a dawning realization and a profound sense of gratitude. She had faced her fear of being alone and found she wasn't. Next was Mai. She stopped dead in the center of a long, mural-lined hallway. Her face, usually a mask of bored indifference, was pale. Her dark eyes wide with a horror she could not conceal. She was seeing a vision, a potential future born of her own cultivated apathy. She saw Zuko, his face twisted not with anger but with a deep, sorrowful disappointment. She saw her father, consumed by the power Azula had given him, becoming a tyrant in his own right. And she saw Naruto, his light extinguished, falling in a battle she could have helped prevent, if only she had cared enough to act. No, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't care. The words, her lifelong mantra, now sounded like a desperate lie. A crumbling shield against the unbearable pain of loss. Is that really true, Mai? Naruto's voice came from beside her. He stood there, not in judgment, but with a quiet understanding. Or is it just easier to pretend you don't care than to risk the pain of losing the things you do? He didn't need to say more. The question itself was the key. Mai looked from the horrible vision to the real, solid presence of Naruto beside her. She made a choice. The vision shattered like glass, leaving behind a single, terrifying, and motivating truth. Apathy was not a shield, it was a cage. And she was finally, desperately, willing to break out of it. Finally, they reached the heart of the temple. A vast, domed chamber, open to the sky through a massive oculus in the ceiling. Moonlight streamed down, illuminating a raised platform in the center, upon which rested a single, large, uncut crystal that pulsed with a soft, internal light. This was the dragon's soul, the focal point of the world's spiritual energy. But guarding it was the temple's final, most powerful test. As Azula stepped towards the crystal, the air grew heavy, charged with ozone. The whispers coalesced, talking on a form and a voice that made her blood run cold. It was the voice of her mother, Ursa, but twisted, laced with a pity that was more venomous than any hatred. My daughter, the spectral, shimmering form of Ursa said, its form coalescing from the moonlight. Still trying so hard, still chasing after a monster's love. Does he even see you as a daughter, Azula? Or just a perfect, beautiful weapon? Be silent, Azula snarled, launching a bolt of blue fire. It passed harmlessly through the phantasm, dissipating against the far wall. The illusion of Ursa simply smiled a sad, gentle smile. You think power will protect you? That it will make you happy? It will only leave you alone, just as it left your father. Then, a second figure appeared, far more terrible. A phantasm of Fire Lord Ozai, clad in full armor. His face a mask of cold, imperious disappointment. Weakness, the vision of her father boomed, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. You surround yourself with emotional cripples and a foreign savage. You let sentiment cloud your judgment. You have failed me. You were always a disappointment, second best to your brother, even in exile. This was the blow that broke through her armor. The accusation from her mother was painful, but the judgment from her father was a stake through the heart. It was the single, defining fear of her entire existence. That she was not good enough, that his love was conditional. And that she had failed to meet the conditions. No, she whispered, her perfect control shattering. No, I am not weak. I am a prodigy. I am perfect. She unleashed her fire, not in precise, controlled bolts, but in a wild, uncontrolled storm of blue flame, a raw, screaming tantrum of power and pain that scorched the ancient stone walls. The phantasms did not flinch. They simply watched her, their expressions of pity and disappointment unchanging. And Azula broke. She fell to her knees, the fire dying from her fingertips, and she let out a dry, racking sob of pure, undiluted agony. Her entire life had been a performance to win the approval of an audience of one, and in her own mind, she had failed. The perfect princess, the master of fear and control, was now just a lost, broken child. Kneeling in the ruins of her own soul, Mai and Ty Lee started forward, their faces etched with shock and a fierce, protective concern for their friend. But Iro held them back with a gentle hand. This is not a battle that can be won with knives or Kai blocking, he said softly. This is a wound of the spirit. It requires a different kind of medicine. Naruto walked past the phantasms as if they were nothing more than smoke and moonlight. He did not fight them. He did not acknowledge them. His focus was solely on the kneeling, sobbing girl on the platform. He knelt in front of her. his presence a shield of warmth and absolute reality against the cold whispers of the past. He didn't speak. He simply reached out and gently brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The simple, human contact was like a lightning strike. Azula flinched, her head snapping up, her golden eyes, now red-rimmed and filled with a shocking vulnerability, stared at him. She expected him to mock her, to see her as weak, to use this moment against her. Instead, his own eyes were filled with a profound empathy that cut through her defenses. "Your mother was wrong," he said, his voice quiet but resonant with an unshakable certainty. "She saw your strength as a monstrosity. And your father," Naruto's voice hardened with contempt, "is a fool. He sees love as a reward to be earned, not a gift to be given. The only monster here is him." He didn't wait for her to respond. He reached out and pulled her into an embrace, holding her firmly as she trembled. "Their voices are just echoes, Azula. They are not real. I am real. This is real." He projected his Ryuki, not as a weapon, but as a blanket of pure, unconditional warmth and acceptance. It was an energy that did not judge, did not demand, did not test. It simply was. Against the undeniable truth of his presence, of his touch, the phantasms flickered and died, their power gone. Azula, for the first time in her life, did not fight back. She did not push him away. She sagged against him, her rigid posture collapsing, and for a long moment, she was silent. Then, a quiet, shuddering sob escaped her, and she clung to him. The perfect princess finally allowing herself to be just a girl, finding solace not in power or perfection, but in the arms of the one person who had seen the broken pieces of her soul and had not turned away. They stood there for a long time, in the silent heart of the ancient temple, the moonlight from the oculus bathing them in a soft, silver glow. The trials were over. They had found no weapon, no ultimate power source. They had found something far more dangerous, and far more valuable. They had found each other's truths. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Scars of Sanctuary. The Sill. Ents on the return journey from the temple's heart was a living entity, a fifth passenger in their small boat. It was a dense, heavy silence, unlike the tranquil quiet of the caldera. It was composed of the things left unsaid, the raw nerves left exposed, the tectonic shift in their shared universe that had occurred in the moonlit chamber. The rhythmic splash of Iroh's oars against the unnaturally still, turquoise water was the only sound, a gentle, metronomic beat counting out the seconds of this new and fragile reality. Each splash seemed to ask a question that no one dared to answer. Naruto sat across from Azula, his posture relaxed but his senses on high alert. He wasn't watching for external threats, but for the subtle tremors that radiated from the princess. She was a statue carved from ice, her hands resting in her lap. Her gaze fixed on the receding, impossible architecture of the temple. Her face was a perfect, alabaster mask, scrubbed clean of the tear tracks and the raw vulnerability he had held in his arms. It was a masterful reconstruction, a testament to a lifetime spent mastering the art of emotional suppression. But it was a flawed masterpiece. He could see the faint, almost invisible tremor in her hands. The rigid set of her jaw that spoke not of control, but of a desperate, white-knuckled grip on the shattered fragments of her composure. He could feel her energy, her fire. It was still there, a core of blue-hot intensity, but it was brittle. It felt like a pane of glass that had been struck 1,000 times and was now held together only by sheer force of will. Beside him, Mai and Tai Li were a study in contrasts. Tai Li, usually a bubbling font of motion and sound, was utterly still. She sat with her hands tucked under her legs, her gaze flitting between Azula's rigid back and Naruto's calm profile. Her face was a canvas of worry, her chipper aura replaced by a palpable, empathetic concern that was almost painful to witness. She wanted to fix this, to fill the suffocating silence with laughter and cartwheels, but she instinctively knew that such remedies were woefully inadequate for this particular wound. Mai, on the other hand, seemed almost comfortable in the silence. She sat leaning against the gunwale, her dark eyes half-lidded, watching Azula not with pity, but with a quiet, analytical intensity. She was processing, observing, her mind cataloging the subtle shifts in the group's dynamics. Her own experience in the temple had been a chisel, chipping away at the thick lacquer of her apathy, and now she was seeing the world, and the people in it, with a new, unsettling clarity. As the grand, white stone temple was finally swallowed by the mist of the widow's coil, it felt as though a great weight was both lifted and settled upon them. They had survived the sanctuary, but now they had to survive its scars. The return to the familiar steel and wood of the dragon's talon did little to dispel the oppressive atmosphere. It was as if they had brought the temple's echoing silence back with them. The crew, sensing the shift in their commanders, moved with a quiet efficiency, their usual boisterousness muted, their glances taut. The princess and her entourage filled with a nervous curiosity. Azula was the first to break the fragile formation. The moment her boot touched the deck, she turned, her movements stiff and automatic. "I am retiring to my quarters," she announced to the air, her voice a flat, cold monotone that brooked no argument. "I am not to be disturbed. For any reason." She did not look at any of them. She did not acknowledge their existence. She simply walked away, her back ramrod straight, and disappeared behind the heavy wooden door of her cabin, the sound of the latch clicking into place echoing across the deck like a gunshot. The remaining four stood in an awkward tableau. The click of the door had been a final, definitive severing. The council was broken. "Well," Iro said with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years. "It appears the tea will have to wait." He looked at the three young people before him, his gaze filled with a gentle, weary wisdom. Wounds of the spirit are not like wounds of the flesh. They cannot be stitched or bandaged. They must be given time and air. He placed a comforting hand on Ty Lee's trembling shoulder. "Do not despair. The darkest night is often just before the dawn." He then turned and made his way towards the galley, a small, resolute island of calm in a sea of emotional turmoil. His departure left Naruto, Mai, and Ty Lee adrift. They were the lieutenants of a general who had abandoned the field, the key players in a game whose rules had just been violently rewritten. "What do we do?" Ty Lee asked, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes fixed on the unyielding wood of Azula's door. "We can't just leave her in there alone," she said, not to disturb her. Mai stated, her voice its usual deadpan, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of same concern that was so plain on Ty Lee's face. When Azula gives an order like that, she means it. Trying to force the door would be unwise. "So we just do nothing." Ty Lee's voice rose with a note of desperate frustration. "We just stand here and wait for her to, what? Reassemble herself like one of her stupid war machines." Naruto listened, letting their words fill the void. He felt the weight of their expectations settling on him. He was the catalyst, the intruder who had simultaneously broken and saved their princess. He was the only one who had been inside the blast radius of our emotional detonation and walked away unscathed. In this new, uncertain landscape, he was the only landmark they could navigate by. "Mai's right," he said, his voice calm and steady, cutting through Ty Lee's rising panic. "We can't force our way in. That would just prove the voices in her head were right, that were trying to control her, to use her." He looked from Ty Lee's worried face to Mai's guarded one. "But you're right too, Ty Lee. We can't do nothing." He took a deep breath, the salt-laced air a familiar comfort. "For now, we give her space. But we don't leave. We hold the line. We keep the ship running. We let her know, without saying a word, that we're still here. That the world didn't fall apart just because she did for a minute." He looked up at the ship's mast, at the fire Asian banner that hung limp in the still air. "We're her council, so let's act like it. Mai, I want you to talk to the crew. Subtly. Find out what they saw, what they're whispering about. We need to see. Until the narrative before some stupid rumor about the princess losing her mind takes root." "Ty Lee," he turned to her, his expression softening, "I need you to be our light. The crew is on edge. They're looking to us for cues. Your smile, your energy, it's more important right now than any weapon. Remind them that the sun is still going to rise tomorrow." It was a bold move, assuming command in her absence, but it was the right one. He gave them purpose, a way to channel their anxiety into productive action. Mai gave a single, sharp nod, her expression hardening with resolve. She was a spy, and he had just given her a mission she understood. Ty Lee looked at him, her wide eyes filled with a mixture of relief and admiration. He hadn't dismissed her fears, he had given them a name and a function. He had called her a light. A shaky, but genuine, Smile returned to her face. Right. The sun. I can do that. As they dispersed to their tasks, Naruto was left alone on the deck, the silence returning. But now it was a different kind of silence. It was the quiet of a commander surveying a battlefield after the first, bloody engagement, knowing the war was far from over. Later that evening, as a sliver of a crescent moon hung in a sky littered with impossibly bright stars, Ty Lee found him. He was at the stern, leaning against the railing, watching the ship's wake churn the phosphorescent plankton into a glowing, ethereal trail. He had spent the day in quiet observation, helping the crew with minor tasks, his presence a calm and steadying influence. The crew was scared, Ty Lee said, her voice soft as she came to stand beside him. She had done as he asked, her cheerful presence a balm on the crew's frayed nerves, but now, away from their watchful eyes, her own worry was evident. They respect you, a lot. Especially after the sea serpent. But they're terrified of her. They're whispering that the temple was haunted, that a spirit possessed the princess. Sometimes the most terrifying ghosts are the ones we carry inside us, Naruto murmured, his gaze still on the glowing water. I know, Ty Lee admitted, her voice dropping. In the temple, I saw my sisters. My 6 perfect, identical sisters. They were all standing in a line, looking at me, and they just laughed. They said I was a clown, that I ran away to join the circus because I was afraid no one would ever take me seriously. She hugged herself, a shiver running through her despite the warm night air. And the worst part is, they were right. I mean, not about the clown part, but I was always trying so hard to be different from them. To stand out, because I was so scared of just being one of 7, of being nothing special. Naruto turned to her, his expression serious and kind. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be seen for who you are, Ty Lee. But your sisters, the ones in your head, they were wrong about one thing. You didn't run away. You ran towards something. You chose your own path. You honed your skills until you were one of the most dangerous people I've ever met. That's not running away. That's courage. He reached out and gently tapped her forehead with his 2 fingers. Your strength isn't just in your hands and feet. It's in here. He tapped her chest, over her heart. You see the best in people. You hold this broken little family of ours together with your optimism. In that temple, you were afraid of being abandoned, of being useless. But today, you were the one keeping everyone else from falling apart. That's not a silly distraction, Ty Lee. That's a superpower. A tear traced a silent path down her cheek, but she was smiling, a real, watery, grateful smile. No one's ever said that before, she whispered. They just see the acrobat. She impulsively threw her arms around him. A tight, desperate hug that was filled with a week's worth of unspoken fear and a moment's worth of profound relief. Thank you, Naruto. He returned the hug, a simple, comforting gesture. When she pulled back, her eyes were clearer, her aura brighter. The fear had not vanished, but it no longer held power over her. She had faced the echo of her soul and, with a little help, had found the strength to silence it. An hour later, another shadow detached itself from the ship's superstructure. Mai approached him with her usual silent tread, a cup of steaming tea in her hand. She offered it to him without a word. He took it, the warmth seeping into his fingers. The tea was a complex, smoky blend he didn't recognize. It's called Shadow Leaf, she said, her a low murmur that barely disturbed the quiet of the night. It only grows in the volcanic soil on my family's estate. It's supposed to calm the mind. Thanks, he said, taking a sip. It tasted of earth and fire and a deep, profound stillness. How are you holding up? She leaned against the railing, a mirror of his own posture. My vision in the temple, it wasn't of the past. It was the future. She spoke in a monotone. But the words were heavy with a new, unfamiliar weight. I saw things, people I know, hurting, and I was just watching, doing nothing, because I didn't care. She looked at him, her dark eyes, usually so hooded and distant, were wide and searching in the moonlight. I've spent my whole life building a fortress of boredom around myself. I thought if I didn't care about anything, then nothing could ever hurt me. And did it work? Naruto asked softly. A humorless smile, a brief, fleeting quirk of her lips, appeared and vanished. No, It just made me a prisoner inside my own walls. And it hurt anyway. She was silent for a long moment, watching the stars. On the docks in Shujing, I overheard two of the Crimson Fleet lieutenants talking. They weren't just dealing with Bao. They have a contact, high up in the Fire Nation military command. Someone who's been feeding them naval intelligence for years. They called him the Weevil. Naruto straightened up, his full attention on her. This was more than just gossip. This was high-level intelligence. Why didn't you say anything before? Because before, it was just information. It was just another bore. Ing part of a boring war one didn't care about, she said, her voice laced with a bitter self-recrimination. It didn't seem important. But now, she trailed off, her gaze finding his again. Now I think it is. I think everything is important. She had taken her first, tentative step out of her fortress. She had chosen to care. What did you see in there, Naruto? She asked, her voice dropping to a near whisper. What's your ghost? He looked out at the dark horizon, the question pulling at the frayed edges of his own memory. That's the problem, I don't have a ghost. I have a void. I didn't see a past I'm afraid of. I saw nothing. A blank space where a life is supposed to be. He clenched his fist. It's like trying to remember a song you've never heard. There are fragments, feelings, but no picture. No names. Just a gaping hole. It was an admission of a vulnerability he hadn't shown to anyone else, a shared moment of brokenness in the quiet solitude of the night. Mai didn't offer sympathy. She simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of his truth. In that moment, a bond of a different kind was forged between them, a bond not of cheer or passion, but of shared scars and a quiet, mutual understanding of the darkness that lay within. His last visitor of the night was Iro. The old general found him on the upper deck, where he was attempting to meditate, to center himself after the emotional turbulence of the day. Iro carried a small tray with his pie show board and a steaming pot of his favorite ginseng tea. A clear mind is a calm sea, Iro said by way of greeting, setting the board between them. But even the calmest sea has currents and depths that can pull a sailor down if he is not careful. They played in a comfortable silence for a time, the soft click of the tiles a soothing counterpoint to the creak of the ship's rigging. Iro, as always, played a game of harmony and flow, his moves seeming to create patterns on the board rather than simply attacking. What happened in that temple? With my niece, Iro began, placing a white lotus tile. I have not seen her that unguarded since she was a small child, before her mother. He sighed, his gaze distant. Ozai's love was a crucible. He did not want a daughter. He wanted a reflection of his own power, his own perfection. He forged Azula in the fires of his ambition, burning away her compassion, her empathy, her doubt. Anything he considered a weakness. He left her with nothing but her prodigious talent and a desperate, terrifying fear of failure. He looked at Naruto, his eyes filled with a deep and profound gratitude. You did not fight her fire with fire. You did not try to extinguish it. You simply weathered her storm. You offered her a sanctuary, a moment of unconditional acceptance. It is a medicine she has never tasted before. It may be a bitter pill for her to swallow, but it is the only thing that can heal the sickness in her soul. Iro reached into his sleeve and produced a small, silk-wrapped object. He placed it on the table. I recovered this from the temple's central chamber. I believe it belongs with you. Naruto unwrapped the silk. It was a shard of the central crystal, the dragon's soul. It was no bigger than his thumb, but it pulsed with a faint, internal crimson light, a warmth that felt like a familiar heartbeat against his palm. The temple was a part of a larger network. Iro explained, a series of conduits that focused the world's natural energy. That crystal was its heart. Your own energy, your Ryuki, resonates with it. Perhaps it can help you find what you have lost. Naruto closed his hand around the crystal shard. He closed his eyes, focusing his own Ryuki, not outwards, but inwards, using the crystal as a lens. The void in his memory did not fill, but a single, sharp, impossibly clear image burst into his mind's eye. It was a woman's face. Her hair was a startling, vibrant crimson, the color of a sunset. Her eyes were a gentle violet, filled with a fierce, unconditional love. She was smiling, her face etched with a mixture of joy and a deep, soul-crushing sadness. A name echoed in the silence of his mind, not a memory, but an instinct. A word that felt like home. Kushina. The image vanished, leaving him breathless, his heart pounding in his chest. It was the first solid piece of his past he had ever grasped. A face, a name, a feeling. It wasn't a map, but it was a single, shining star in a black and empty sky. "Thank you, Iro," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. The old general simply smiled. "The longest journey begins with a single step. It seems you have finally found your first." He spent the next 2 days in a state of quiet focus, holding the line as he'd promised. He trained with the crew, sparred with a newly determined Tai Li, and discussed strategy with a more engaged Mai. He was the ship's anchor, its temporary center of gravity. But always, his thoughts returned to the closed door of Azula's cabin. He knew he couldn't wait forever. The wound had been given air. Now, it needed to be cleaned. On the 3rd day, he went to her. He didn't knock. He simply opened the door and stepped inside. The room was pristine, orderly, and cold. Azula was in the center of the chamber, dressed in a simple, black training tunic. She was practicing her firebending. But it was not the fluid, graceful, and deadly dance he was used to. This was different. It was rigid, mechanical, each movement broken down into its component parts. She was creating complex geometric shapes with her blue fire, cubes, spheres, dodecahedrons, holding them in the air, her concentration absolute. It was a display of technical mastery that was breathtaking, and utterly devoid of soul. She was trying to rebuild herself with logic and precision, to create a new identity from the cold, hard math of her power. She didn't stop when he entered. She didn't acknowledge his presence at all. He walked to the center of the room and stood opposite her, watching the perfectly formed cube of blue fire that hovered between them. "Impressive," he said, his voice calm. "You've managed to turn a bonfire into a blueprint." Her eyes, cold and distant, finally flickered to meet his. "I am perfecting my form. Removing the emotional impurities that lead to weakness and error." "You think your emotions are an impurity?" he asked, genuinely curious. "I thought they were the fuel for the fire." "The fuel is unpredictable," she snapped, the fiery cube wavering for a fraction of a second. "It can burn you. Control, precision. These are the only things a warrior can rely on." "That's a lie," Naruto said simply, his voice cutting through her carefully constructed logic. "You're not a warrior right now, Azula. You're a child hiding in a fortress made of fire because you're afraid of the dark." The cube exploded. A wave of pure, blue heat washed over him, but he didn't flinch. The rage was back in her eyes, but it was different now. It was the fury of a wounded animal, lashing out not to conquer, but to drive him away from her pain. "You know nothing of my fears," she hissed. "I know you spent your entire life trying to be perfect for a father who wouldn't love you if you were," he shot back, his voice rising to meet her intensity. "I know you pushed away a mother who did love you because you were taught that her love was a weakness. I know that in that temple, you weren't afraid of some ghost. You were afraid of yourself. The part of you that isn't a princess, or a prodigy, or a weapon. The part that's just a person. And it terrified you." He took a step closer, into her personal space, into the shimmering aura of heat that surrounded her. "You think your strength is in this?" He steered to the flickering blue flame that now danced on her fingertips. "This is just a tool. It's a hammer. You can build a house with it, or you can smash your own fingers. Your real strength, the strength I saw, was the will that kept you from shattering into a million pieces after a childhood that would have broken anyone else. You were a survivor, Azula. Stop trying to be a monster." That was the final spark. With a scream of pure, undiluted rage and pain, she attacked him. It wasn't a calculated assault, it was a primal scream made of fire. The room became a vortex of blue flame. She was faster than he had ever seen her. Her movements economical and brutally efficient, each strike aimed to maim, to punish. He didn't retreat. He didn't erect a shield. He met her, his own body wreathed in a calm, steady aura of crimson Ryuki. It became a violent, intimate dance. She would lash out with a whip of fire, and he would catch it, the blue flames harmlessly enveloping his crimson glowing hand, his Ryuki neutralizing her heat. She would launch a volley of fire daggers, and he would weave between them, his movements a fluid, effortless expression of his own power, using the very air curry. NTS from her attack to propel his evasions. He didn't strike back. He contained her. He mirrored her. He became a living vessel for her rage, absorbing her storm, showing her that her most powerful, furious attacks were not enough to destroy him, not enough to drive him away. The fight raged for minutes that felt like an eternity, a hurricane of emotion and energy confined to the small space of her cabin. It ended, as all storms do, in exhaustion. Azula, her energy spent, her body trembling with exertion, threw one last, desperate punch of fire. Naruto caught her fist, his hand enveloping hers. The blue and crimson energies mingled for a moment, and then, they both died, leaving them in the sudden, ringing silence, their faces inches apart, panting in the superheated air. He looked into her eyes. The rage was gone. The cold precision was gone. All that was left was a vast, empty space, a field of ashes where a fortress used to be. "How?" she whispered, her voice a raw, broken thing. "How do you learn to carry the ghosts?" he said, his voice soft again. "You don't fight them. You don't hide from them. You just make room for them. And you keep walking." He released her hand. He expected her to pull away, to rebuild her walls. Instead, she swayed on her feet, and for the second time in 3 days, she collapsed. He caught her weight a fragile thing in his arms. She didn't embrace him this time. She simply rested her head against his chest, her shoulders shaking with silent, exhausted sobs. "Help me," she whispered, the words so quiet he almost didn't hear them. It was not a command. It was not a demand. It was a plea. "I don't know how to walk." He held her, his own heart aching with a fierce, protective empathy. "Okay," he said softly, his hand stroking her hair. "Okay, we'll learn together." The next morning, the door to the princess's cabin opened. Azula emerged. She was dressed in her formal uniform, her hair was perfectly coiffed, her posture was impeccable. To the casual observer, she was unchanged. But to those who knew, the difference was profound. The tension was gone from her shoulders. The brittle, manic energy was gone from her eyes. She looked tired, yes. But she also looked clear. She walked directly to the map room, where Naruto, Mai, Tai Li, and Iro were already gathered, as if she knew they would be waiting. She didn't look at them as she entered, instead focusing on the large map of the Earth Kingdom that dominated the table. "My father's objective," she began, her voice crisp and clear, "is the capture of the Avatar and the fall of Ba Sing Se. It is a strategy of decapitation. Simple, brutal, and flawed." She looked up, her golden gaze sweeping over them, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "It assumes that the Earth Kingdom is a monolith. That it will crumble if you cut off the head. But what we learned in Shujing, what the pirates' very existence proves, is that the kingdom is already rotting from within. A network of corrupt officials, warlords, and criminals are profiting from this war. They don't want it to end." She looked at Mai, the weevil. "This contact inside our own military. He is the first priority. A traitor in our ranks is a cancer that can destroy us faster than any army." She turned to Iro. "Uncle, your knowledge of history, of the secret societies and forgotten paths of this land, is invaluable. We will no longer be hunting a single person. We will be dismantling a shadow government." Finally, she looked at Naruto. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice was steady. Quote, "We are no longer on a simple military mission. This has become a campaign of counter-espionage and insurgency. It will require unconventional methods." She placed her hands flat on the table, a gesture of both command and inclusion. "I need your counsel, all of you. What is our first move?" The question hung in the air, a landmark of a new era. She hadn't given an order. She had asked a question. She had invited them in. Before anyone could answer, a shadow fell over the map room's porthole. A screech echoed from above. A moment later, a ship's mate burst into the room, his face pale. "Princess, a messenger hawk. It bears the Fire Lord's personal seal." He held out the black scroll, tied with a golden ribbon. Azula took it, her fingers steady. As she unrolled it, a new kind of silence fell over the room, the silence of impending doom. The sanctuary was over. The outside world, in all its fury, had come crashing back in. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Fortress of Black Steel. The Fire Lord's seal was a dragon's claw. rendered in stark, unforgiving lines of black wax. It was a symbol of absolute authority, a mark that commanded armies and toppled nations. As Azula's sharp, perfectly manicured nail broke it, the sound was a barely audible crack, yet it resonated in the silent map room like the snapping of a bone. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. The quiet sanctuary they had carved out for themselves in the wake of the temple was about to be invaded by the harsh, unforgiving reality of the father who haunted their princess's soul. She unrolled the black parchment, her face a mask of regal neutrality. Her eyes, however, those brilliant golden chips of obsidian, moved with a ravenous speed, devouring the stark, aggressive calligraphy. The others watched, not her, but the subtle tells of her reaction. A faint tightening around her lips. A fractional narrowing of her eyes. A stillness in her posture that was not calm, but the coiled, waiting stillness of a serpent before it strikes. When she finished, she did not speak. She simply rolled the scroll back into a tight, perfect cylinder and placed it in the exact center of the map, a black monolith on the colored parchment of the world. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. It was Tai Li, unable to bear the tension, who finally broke it. Is it bad? She asked, her voice a small, hesitant thing. Azula finally looked up, her gaze sweeping over them, cold and distant, a chilling echo of the girl she had been before the temple. But Naruto, watching her closely, saw the truth. It was not a regression, it was a performance. A carefully donned suit of armor for the battle she knew was coming. Father is pleased, she said, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. Our success in Shu-Jing has been noted. He considers Lord Bao's treason and the dismantling of Kato's fleet a satisfactory, if unconventional, victory. She picked up the scroll, tapping it against her palm. He has a new task for us. A promotion, of sorts. We are to proceed immediately to Kuragane's stronghold. Iro, who had been quietly observing from the corner, set his teacup down with a soft click. Kuragane, he murmured, his brow furrowed. The Black Steel Fortress. The heart of our naval research and development. It is the most heavily fortified installation on the western coast. Indeed, Azula confirmed, her voice devoid of inflection. It is also the drydock for a new class of warship. The prototype is codenamed IF-01, the Inferno. According to my father, it is a dreadnought designed to be a fleet killer. Capable of leveling a coastal city with a single volley. Her eyes flickered to the sunstone they had recovered, which now sat in a velvet-lined box on a side table. Its primary weapon is an energy Y cannon that utilizes a refined and weaponized form of sunstone as its focusing lens. Our mission is to oversee the final stages of its outfitting and to preside over its maiden voyage and public demonstration. In 3 days' time. 3 days. The timeline was a slap in the face. Naruto saw the pieces click into place with a dawning, sickening clarity. The weevil, he said, the name a curse on the air. Azula's gaze snapped to his. A flicker of something. Not surprise, but a shared, grim understanding, passing between them. Precisely. The most advanced, most secret weapon in the Fire Nation's arsenal. A project of this magnitude, with its complex supply chains and specialized personnel, would be the perfect breeding ground for a high-level traitor. It's the one place where he could do the most damage. Gather the most valuable intelligence. So we have to choose, Mai stated, her voice flat, but her eyes were burning with a new, focused intensity. We either obey the Fire Lord's direct order and play watchdog for his new toy, or we defy him and hunt the traitor. No, Azula's voice was sharp, cutting. We do both. She looked at her small, unorthodox council, the mask of the cold princess slipping just enough to reveal the sharp, strategic mind beneath, the mind Naruto had seen during their Pai Sho game. To refuse this mission is to invite suspicion. It would be an act of defiance my father would not tolerate. We will go to Kuragane. We will play our parts. I will be the perfect, obedient daughter, overseeing her father's grand project. And under that cover, we will conduct our own investigation. We will find this weevil, and we will cut the cancer out of the heart of the Fire Nation's war machine. It was a plan of breathtaking audacity. To hunt a master spy and the most secure military base in the world, while under the direct scrutiny of the Fire Lord's command structure, was tantamount to walking into a dragon's den and attempting to steal its teeth. This will be difficult, Iro cautioned. Stroking his beard, Kurogane is run by Grand Admiral Isamu. He is a man forged from the same fire as Ozai. He is a true believer, a zealot for order and discipline. He sees the world in black and white, loyalty and treason. He will not appreciate our creative methods. Then he will be our primary obstacle, Azula said, a dangerous glint in her eye. Which makes him our primary suspect. Their roles were decided in the quiet hum of the map room. Azula would be the public face, the demanding, imperious princess, her every action a performance for Admiral Isamu. Mai, leveraging her new status as a governor's daughter, would be her official aide-de-camp, a position that would grant her access to personnel files, supply manifests, and the base's bureau. Crécy, the paper trail where the weevil had to have left a mark. Tai Li, officially designated as a morale officer and entertainer, for the princess's retinue, a title that made her giggle despite the gravity of the situation, would be their scout, her unassuming presence and acrobatic skills allowing her to map the base's physical layout and social networks in a way no soldier could. And Naruto, he, was given the most nebulous and perhaps most important title, Azula's spiritual advisor and personal protector. It was a title so bizarre, so outside the rigid confines of military hierarchy, that it would grant him the freedom to move and observe where others could not. Iro, as planned, would remain with the ship, their silent guardian and a potential escape route, should the dragon's den prove too hot. Kurogane's stronghold was not a city, like Shujing. It was an engine. Carved from the heart of a dormant volcanic island, it was a sprawling, brutalist masterpiece of black iron, gray stone, and pressurized steam. Smokestacks belched black plumes into the sky, a constant, choking haze that obscured the sun. The air tasted of coal dust and ozone. The sounds were not of people, but of industry, the clang of hammers on steel. The hiss of hydraulics, the deep, resonant hum of a massive, unseen power source. There were no gardens, no art, no beauty. There was only function. It was a physical manifestation of the Fire Lord's will, ugly, efficient, and utterly overwhelming. As the dragon's talon docked, they were greeted not by a welcoming party, but by a phalanx of soldiers in immaculate, spiked armor. Their faces hidden behind demonic-looking masks. At their head stood a man who seemed to be carved from the same volcanic rock as the fortress itself. Grand Admiral Isamu was tall and lean, his posture as rigid as a steel rod. His face was a roadmap of old battle scars, the most prominent of which was a vertical line of jagged, white tissue that bisected his left eye and lip, giving him a permanent, unnerving sneer. His eyes were the color of cold ash, and they burned with the fire of fanaticism. "Princess Azula," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He executed a perfect, clipped bow. "Welcome to Kurogane. The Fire Lord informed me of your arrival. Your oversight is an honor." The words were correct, but the tone was not. There was no warmth, no deference, only a grudging acknowledgement of her rank. His cold, gray eyes swept over her companions, lingering for a moment on Naruto with a look of undisguised contempt. "Your retinue is irregular. My methods are my own, Admiral," Azula replied, her voice dripping with an icy condescension that was a perfect mirror of his own coldness. "They have proven effective. I trust you have arranged suitable quarters and granted my staff the access they require." "Of course, Princess," Isamu said, the sneer deepening. "We are nothing if not efficient." The fortress was a maze of identical, gray corridors, the air thick with the smell of recycled air and machine oil. The personnel they passed were a blur of disciplined, uniformed figures who moved with a singular purpose, their faces grim and set. Tai Li's bright, colorful tunic and even brighter smile seemed almost scandalous in the oppressive, monochrome environment. She attempted a cheerful wave at one of the guards, who simply stared back, his expression hidden behind his mask. As if she were a strange, brightly colored insect he was contemplating crushing. Their first official duty was the inspection of the inferno. It was a monster, docked in a cavernous, subterranean chamber. The ship was a behemoth of black steel, its lines sharp and aggressive, designed not for speed, but for utter devastation. Its centerpiece was the cannon, a massive, articulated weapon that dominated the forward deck, its barrel aimed at the cavern ceiling like a defiant fist raised to the heavens. Isamu led them on the tour, his voice a proud, rumbling monologue about the ship's capabilities. Over 500 feet of reinforced armor plating. A crew of 800. And the breath of Ozai, he said, patting the cannon's breech with a disturbing affection. Sunstone focusing lens allows for a blast of pure, thermal energy with a destructive yield 10 times that of a conventional catapult volley. It will render any fortress, any fleet, obsolete. While Azula engaged Isamu in a technical discussion, her questions sharp and precise, Naruto extended his senses. He let his Ryuki flow, a subtle, invisible probe. He felt the immense, dormant power coiled within the ship's core. A throbbing heart of contained energy. He felt the people, the engineers and officers who swarmed over the vessel. He tasted their pride, their fatigue, their ambition. And he tasted something else. A single, discordant note in the symphony of fanaticism. A thread of cold, calculated deception, hidden deep beneath a veneer of perfect, disciplined loyalty. He couldn't pinpoint its source, but he knew, with an unshakable certainty, that the weevil was here. He was on this ship. The investigation began in earnest. In the sterile, archive rooms of the fortress, Mai, in her crisp, formal aide's uniform, became a shark in a sea of paper. She was relentless, her mind, once dulled by apathy, now a razor-sharp instrument. She cross-referenced shipping manifests, personnel transfers, and technical schematics. Her eyes scanning for the single, telltale inconsistency that would betray the traitor. She found that the military bureaucracy, for all its vaunted efficiency, was a creature of habit. The same forms, the same signatures, the same routes. A deviation, however small, would stand out like a drop of blood on a white uniform. Meanwhile, Ty Lee put her unique skills to work. Under the guise of practicing her performance routines for the upcoming launch ceremony, she explored the fortress. Her acrobatic grace allowed her to reach places no one else could, the tops of storage containers, the narrow maintenance catwalks high above the cavern floor, the labyrinthine network of ventilation shafts that honeycombed the fortress. She was not just a scout, she was a ghost, mapping the fortress's secret pathways, observing patrol patterns, and, most importantly, listening. In the mess halls and recreation areas, her cheerful, non-threatening demeanor was a disarming weapon. Guards and engineers, eager for a distraction from the oppressive gloom, would talk to her. They complained about the long hours, the bad food, the admiral's demanding nature. And in the midst of the mundane gossip, she began to pick up whispers. Rumors of a senior engineer who kept to himself, a supply officer who seemed to live above his means, a communications tech who worked unusually late hours. They were small, insignificant threads, but when woven together, they began to form a picture. Naruto's role was one of subtle, psychic warfare. He accompanied Azula everywhere, a silent, watchful presence at her side. As she interrogated department heads and senior officers, Naruto would focus his Ryuki, not to read minds, but to sense the emotional resonance behind their words. He could feel the surge of anxiety when a question hit too close to home, the flicker of deceit behind a confident answer, the hollow ring of a false declaration of loyalty. He was a human lie detector. His senses far more reliable than any interrogation device. He found the deception strongest around the engineering team responsible for the cannon's focusing array. The chief engineer, a man named Kenji, was a brilliant but nervous man, his answers technically perfect but laced with a current of deep-seated fear. Naruto knew the man was hiding something. He just didn't know if he was the traitor, or merely a pawn. The pressure began to mount. Admiral Isamu was a constant, oppressive presence. He shadowed Azula's inspections, his cold, gray eyes missing nothing. He questioned her methods, her reliance on her circus performers and her savage pet. Your father's orders were for you to oversee this project, princess, not to deconstruct it, he said to her one evening, after she had spent hours grilling the cannon's munitions loaders. Your intrusive questions are disrupting the launch schedule. My father expects perfection, Admiral, Azula had retorted, her voice like cracking ice. I will not allow his greatest achievement to be sullied by incompetence. If that means disrupting your precious schedule, then so be it. It was a masterful performance, using her father's name as both a shield and a sword. But that night, Naruto found her on the small, grated balcony of her Spartan quarters, staring out at the industrial hellscape of the fortress. The mask was gone. She was rubbing her temples. A deep weariness in her eyes. He's like a stone wall, she said, her voice low. He is exactly what my father wants in a commander. Unquestioning, unflinching, utterly predictable, she turned to Naruto, a flicker of the old vulnerability in her gaze. He reminds me of what I was trying to be. What I thought I had to be. It's exhausting. You're not that person anymore, Naruto said softly. You're walking. Remember, it's supposed to be hard at first. It would be easier, she whispered, a terrible honesty in her voice, to just burn him. To burn all of this. To tear it down and start over. But you won't, Naruto said, his voice a firm, steady anchor. Because you're not just a hammer anymore, Azula. You're the architect, and architects don't destroy their own foundations. His words, his unwavering belief in this new version of her, seemed to steady her. She took a deep breath, the warrior's mask settling back into place, but this time, it seemed less like AC. Age and more like a tool she was choosing to wield. The breakthrough came on the evening of the second day, less than 24 hours before the scheduled demonstration. Her eyes red-rimmed exhaustion but burning with a triumphant fire, burst into their makeshift command center in Azula's quarters. Ty Lee was there, marking potential weak points on a stolen schematic of the fortress. I've got it, Mai said, her voice a low, excited hiss. She slapped a requisition form down on the table. The focusing lens for the cannon. It's made of a dozen interlocking sunstone crystals. Each nay has to be perfectly cut and calibrated. The prime crystal, the one at the very heart of the array, was sourced from the Emperor's private mine. It's flawless. According to this form, signed by Chief Engineer Kenji. That crystal was installed yesterday. She then slammed a second document down. It was a shipping manifest from a supposedly secure cargo vessel that had left the fortress 2 hours ago. And according to this, a crate of defective engineering components scheduled for disposal was loaded onto that ship. The crate's weight and dimensions, however, perfectly match the specificity. Ons of the prime crystal's shielded container. Tai Lee gasped. He swapped it. The weevil swapped out the most important part of the cannon for a fake. Not a fake, Mai corrected, her finger tracing a line on another report. A flawed crystal, one that was rejected during initial quality testing. It looks identical, and it will even function, to a point. But according to the tester's notes, the extreme energy stress of a full power discharge, it will destabilize. The horrifying truth of the plan settled over the room, cold and heavy as a shroud. Sabotage, Azula breathed, her eyes wide with a mixture of fury and a cold. Terrible understanding. He's not trying to steal the technology. He's trying to destroy it. Publicly, Naruto saw the full scope of the plot. The demonstration, he said, his voice grim. The whole world will be watching. Representatives from the Earth Kingdom, neutral territories, everyone. When you give the order to fire, the cannon won't just fail. The flawed crystal will overload. The energy feedback will cause a catastrophic explosion. The implications were devastating. The inferno, the Fire Nation's ultimate weapon, would be destroyed on its maiden voyage. The crew would be killed. And Princess Azula, the Fire Lord's own daughter, the one sent to personally oversee the project, would be publicly humiliated, her reputation, and perhaps her very life. Consumed in the fires of her father's greatest failure. The weevil wasn't just a traitor. He was an assassin, and his weapon was the very symbol of the Fire Nation's power. The ship is our 80 on its way to the demonstration site, Azula said, her mind racing. And the test firing is scheduled for sunrise tomorrow. The clock was ticking. They were trapped in a fortress of black steel, with a saboteur in their midst. And a ticking time bomb at the heart of the most powerful warship ever built. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Weevil's Gambit. The air in Azula's quarters was a vacuum, the sound and oxygen sucked out by the gravity of their discovery. The map on the table was no longer a strategic tool, it was a death warrant. The Inferno, a black steel behemoth, was sailing to war. A sunrise appointment with its own annihilation, and they were the only souls in the world who knew it. The silence was not one of shock, but of rapid, frantic calculation, the frantic whirring of 4 minds trying to solve an impossible equation against a ticking clock. We go to Isamu, Tai Lee said, her voice tight with a desperate hope, breaking the spell. We have to tell him. He's the admiral, he can stop the launch. Order the ship to return. No, Mai and Azula said in perfect, chilling unison. Mai elaborated, her voice a flat, cold line of logic. Isamu is a zealot. He sees the world in black and red. Fire Nation an enemy. He sees a flawless system of command and control. We come to him now, with no proof other than a few shipping manifests that could be explained away as clerical errors, and what does he see? She looked at each of them in turn. He sees a princess he already distrusts, accompanied by an acrobat, a gloomy teenager, and a foreign mystic, trying to sabotage the most important project in the Fire Nation's history on the eve of its launch. He won't believe us. He'll have us arrested for treason. She's right, Azula affirmed, her voice a low, dangerous growl. The fury she had been suppressing was beginning to leak through the cracks in her composure. Isamu is the system personified. To him, the system cannot fail. Therefore, anyone who claims it has is, by definition, a traitor. She paced the room, a caged predator. This is the Weevil's masterstroke. He hasn't just sabotaged the ship, he's sabotaged the very system meant to protect it. He's used our own rigid discipline, our own fanaticism, against us. We are trapped. Naruto, who had been silent, his eyes closed in deep concentration, finally spoke. No, he said, his voice a calm, solid anchor in the swirling chaos. We're not trapped. We're just on the wrong side of the door. We don't need to convince the system. We need to bypass it. He opened his eyes, and they burned with a fierce, unwavering light. The objective has changed. It's no longer about exposing the Weevil. It's about saving the ship. We can deal with the traitor after the sun rises. He laid his hands flat on the table, commanding their attention. We have a suspect. Chief Engineer Kenji. His name is on the order. Either he is the Weevil, or he's the Weevil's pawn. He is our only lead. We need to break him. Now, a new, desperate plan was forged in the crucible of that moment. A three-pronged assault against the fortress's perfect, unyielding security. Mai, Naruto commanded, his voice taking on the natural authority he had displayed against the sea serpent, an authority Azula did not challenge. The ship with the real crystal. You said it left 2 hours ago. The manifest is a lie, which means its destination is a lie. I need you to find out where it's really going. Hack the harbormaster's logs, bribe a dockworker, I don't care how you do it. Find that ship. Mai's dark eyes gleamed with purpose. Consider it done. She was already gathering her documents, her mind a whirlwind of codes and back channels. Tai Li, Naruto continued, turning to the acrobat. The Inferno is an impenetrable fortress. But every fortress has a crack. You are going to find it for us. Isamu will have the ship on total lockdown before the launch. No one gets on or off without his direct authorization. We need a way in that he doesn't know about. A forgotten maintenance hatch, an underwater intake valve, a service conduit. You have the run of this base. I need a secret door. Tai Li's fear was replaced by a look of fierce determination. He had given her a mission that only she could accomplish. I'll find it, she promised, her voice steady. And us? Azula asked, her arms crossed, her golden eyes boring into him. There was no challenge in her tone, only a raw, focused intensity. She was a weapon, waiting to be aimed. You and I, Naruto said, a grim smile touching his lips, are going to pay a visit to our friend, the chief engineer. It's time we had a little chat. You'll be the storm, I'll be the lightning. Chief Engineer Kenji lived, as did all the senior staff, in a small, sterile apartment carved into the fortress's living quarters sector. The room was a monument to obsessive order. Technical manuals were stacked in perfect, neat piles. Engineering tools were laid out on a clean cloth in order of size. The only personal touch was a single, framed photograph on his bedside table. They didn't knock. Azula blasted the mag lock on the door with a single, precise bolt of blue fire, and the door slid open with a hiss of superheated air. Kenji, a slender, middle-aged man with nervous eyes and ink stains on his fingers, was sitting at his desk, staring at a complex schematic. He leapt to his feet as they entered, his face draining of all color, a choked gasp escaping his lips. Princess, he stammered, his eyes wide with terror. I was not expecting. Azula glided into the room, a vision of imperial wrath. The air around her seemed to drop 20 degrees. "I'm sure you weren't, engineer," she said, her voice a silken purr that was more terrifying than any shout. She picked up a delicate, calibrated measuring tool from his desk, examining it with feigned interest. "Such precision, such attention to detail. It is the hallmark of your work, is it not? And yet, a curious discrepancy has come to my attention." She let the tool drop, the clatter on the metal desk unnaturally loud in the silent room. "A clerical error, perhaps. Regarding the prime focusing crystal for the inferno." Kenji began to tremble, a fine, uncontrollable tremor. I don't know what you mean, princess. All components were installed according to specification. I signed off on it myself." "Oh, I know you did," Azula said, circling him slowly, "which is why this is all so very confusing. Because if a flaw were to be found in that crystal, a fatal flaw, the failure would be traced directly back to you. The destruction of the Fire Lord's grandest creation. The deaths of 800 loyal soldiers. All laid at your feet. Treason of that magnitude, the execution would be slow. Very, very slow." She was playing her part perfectly. She was the storm, a terrifying force of nature designed to batter down his defenses. Kenji was sweating profusely now, his eyes darting around the room as if seeking an escape he knew did not exist. He was terrified of her, absolutely. But he did not break. He was more afraid of something else. Naruto, who had been standing silently by the door, stepped forward. He ignored the engineer and walked over to the bedside table, picking up the framed photograph. It was of a young girl, no older than 10, with her father's nervous eyes but a bright, gap-toothed smile. She was holding a small, mechanical bird that Kenji had clearly built for her. "Your daughter?" Naruto asked, his voice calm and gentle, a stark contrast to Azula's icy venom. Kenji flinched as if struck. "Put that down," he yelped, a flash of desperate fatherly protection in his eyes. Naruto turned to him, his own gaze soft but piercing. He didn't need to read the man's mind. He could feel waves of terror and love and despair rolling off him, a chaotic, painful symphony. "It's not your own life you're afraid for, is it, Kenji?" "It's hers." He held up the photograph. "The weevil has her. That's his leverage. He threatened your daughter to force you to make the swap." The carefully constructed dam of Kenji's denial shattered. He collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands, and a dry, racking sob tore through him. The storm had failed to break him, but the lightning strike of empathy had shattered his resolve. "Yes," he whispered, his voice hoarse with shame and grief. "He has my Emmy. He sent me a picture. She's being held in a warehouse in the lower city. If I didn't do exactly as he said, if I told anyone, he would." He couldn't finish the sentence, another sob choking him. Azula watched the scene, her face unreadable. Her methods had failed, his had succeeded. She had threatened the man's life. Naruto had seen the man's heart. "Who was he, Kenji?" Naruto asked, his voice firm but not unkind. "Who was the weevil?" "I don't know," Kenji cried, looking up, his face a mask of misery. "I've never seen his face. He communicates through encoded messages, delivered by anonymous couriers. He's a ghost, a whisper. He has to have a blind spot," Naruto pressed. "Someplace he felt safe. How did he get the flawed crystal to you? How did he get the real one out?" Kenji's eyes flickered with a dawning memory. "The old comms tower," he stammered. "On the north side of the island. It was decommissioned years ago, but the power conduits still run through the sub-levels. He used a dead drop system there. In the maintenance crawlspace. That's where I left the real crystal for his people to collect. And that's where they left the flawed one for me." At that exact moment, the door slid open again. Mai stood there, her face grim. The cargo ship, its official destination was the reclamation foundry on Ashfall Island. But I sliced into the harbormaster's private logs. Just before it left, it received a new, encrypted heading. A remote, uninhabited island chain, in Earth Kingdom waters. The pieces slammed together. The weevil wasn't a common thief, selling the crystal to the highest bidder. He was delivering it directly to the enemy. "There's more," Kenji said, a desperate hope in his voice. He realized that they were his only chance. The real crystal, he didn't put it on the ship. That was a decoy, in case I was followed. He said it was safer to move it later. It's still here. In the dead drop. In the comms tower. Hope. A single, desperate, shining ray of it. Their comm link. A small device Iro had fashioned for them, crackled to life. It was Ty Lee, her voice a breathless, excited whisper. I've found it. I've found a way in. There's a primary Kula, NT intake pipe that runs from the geothermal vents deep below the fortress directly into the Inferno's engine room. It's a straight shot. A very hot, very wet, very straight shot. But it will get us inside. They had it. All the pieces. The location of the real crystal. A secret way onto the ship. The only thing they didn't have was time. The eastern sky was already beginning to pale from black to a deep, bruised purple. Dawn was coming. They reconvened in Azula's quarters, the air electric with a new, frantic energy. This changes everything, Azula said, her mind moving with lightning speed. Get to the comms tower. Kenji said the weevil used it to communicate. There has to be a trace, a residual energy signature, something you can use to identify him. Find me the traitor. Mai nodded, her dark coat already swirling as she turned to leave. Ty Lee, Azula continued. Your route is our only chance. Get to the intake pipe. Be ready to guide Naruto and the crystal through. Wait, Naruto interrupted. You're not coming. Azula turned to him, and for the first time, he saw a real, genuine, and absolutely terrifying smile on her face. No, I have the most important job of all. I have to create a diversion. Admiral Isamu is about to begin the final launch preparations. He'll be on the bridge of the Inferno with his command staff. The entire fortress will be on high alert. Why? I'll never get near the cannon with him there. She picked up a ceremonial Fire Nation helmet from her table. It's time for the princess to throw a royal tantrum. I'm going to give Isamu a performance so demanding, so infuriating, and so utterly distracting that he won't have time to notice a dragon sage and an acrobat crawling through his engine room. It was a plan born of desperation and genius. A high-stakes heist with the fate of the Fire Nation hanging in the balance. As they prepared to split up, Naruto paused and looked at the frightened engineer, who was now being guarded by two of Azula's royal guards that had been stationed outside her door. Kenji, your daughter. Where is she? Kenji described the warehouse, his voice trembling. Naruto turned to the two guards. Your princess has a new mission for you. Forget guarding her door. Go to that warehouse. Get that little girl back. Use any means necessary. The guards, accustomed to Azula's orders, looked to her for confirmation. Azula's gaze met Naruto's. He saw a flicker of the old her, the one who would have considered the girl an acceptable casualty. Then he saw the new her, the one who had learned about a different kind of strength. You heard my advisor, she said, her voice ringing with an authority that left no room for argument. Go. The guards bowed and vanished. Azula looked at Naruto, a silent, complex acknowledgement passing between them. He had not only trusted her to make the right call, he had expected it. The team scattered into the pre-dawn gloom of the fortress, 3 separate missions with a single, desperate purpose. Azula, a vision of imperial displeasure, strode onto the bridge of the Inferno. Admiral Isamu was there, overseeing the final systems check. Admiral, she snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. There is a smudge on the viewport. A smudge. On the day my father's greatest creation is to be unveiled to the world, you present it to me with a dirty window. Is this the level of perfection the Fire Lord expects? Unacceptable. I want the entire bridge crew to strip and repolish every single metal surface in this room. Now. Isamu's scarred face tightened in fury and disbelief, but a direct order from the princess, no matter how insane, could not be ignored. The diversion had begun. Simultaneously, a shadow in the fortress's underbelly, pried open a maintenance panel at the base of the old comms tower. Her lockpicks a blur of motion. She slipped inside, a portable energy sensor in her hand, ready to hunt for the ghost in the machine. And Naruto and Ty Lee stood before a massive, grated opening in the lowest level of the geothermal plant. A torrent of superheated water and steam rushed past, roaring into the darkness. It was the entrance to the coolant pipe. The entrance to the Inferno. Ready for a swim? Ty Lee asked, a nervous but excited grin on her face. Naruto looked into the roaring, scalding darkness. Just another Tuesday, he replied, and together, they plunged into the belly of the beast. The sun was rising. The clock had run out. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Heart of the Inferno. The plunge into the coolant intake was a violent baptism of steam and sound. The water was near boiling, a scalding, turbulent torrent that clawed at them, trying to strip the skin from their bones. The roar of the rushing water was deafening, a constant, konku. SSIVE pressure that vibrated through Naruto's entire body. For a normal human, it would have been a death sentence, a brutal, scalding end in the fortress's mechanical guts. But Naruto was not a normal human. He had Ty Lee tucked securely against his chest, her smaller frame shielded by his own. He had wrapped them both in a protective cocoon of Ryuki, a shimmering, crimson aura that met the scalding water not with resistance, but with a strange, harmonic resonance. The Ryuki didn't just block the heat, it absorbed it, converting the raw, thermal energy of the geothermal vent into fuel for his own power. The water that touched their skin was still hot, but it was bearable, the life-threatening temperature reduced to that of an uncomfortably hot bath. They were shot through the massive, echoing pipe like a cannonball. The darkness absolute, their only sense of direction the relentless, forward pull of the current. Ty Lee clung to him, her eyes squeezed shut, her usual grace and acrobatie. Sea control utterly useless in the churning chaos. She had found the door, but this was his world now, a place of pure, elemental power. He was her anchor, her shield, her only hope of survival. He could feel her fear, a frantic, hummingbird heartbeat against his ribs, but beneath it, he could also feel a current of absolute, unshakable trust. It was a humbling, fortifying sensation. Their violent journey ended as abruptly as it began. They were spewed out of the pipe into a vast, dark chamber, landing with a heavy splash in a waist-deep pool of cooler, calmer water. The roar of the intake was replaced by the deep, rhythmic, almost organic thrum of a massive, sleeping engine. They were inside. They were in the primary coolant reservoir, a cavernous, circular room at the very bottom of the inferno. Catwalks and massive, insulated pipes crisscrossed the darkness above them, and the air was thick with the smell of hot metal, steam, and ozone. A dim, red emergency light cast long, dancing shadows, making the massive pistons and gears of the engine room look like the ribcage of some colossal, sleeping beast. Ty Lee coughed, sputtering out a mouthful of acrid-tasting water. "Okay," she gasped, her voice shaky but her spirit intact. That was even more fun than it looked. She pushed herself away from him, her feet finding the grated floor of the reservoir. "So, what's the plan, boss?" Naruto scanned the chamber, his senses reaching out, feeling the ship's complex circulatory system. He could feel the thrumming power of the engines, the network of electrical conduits, the flow of personnel on the decks far above. And he could feel a sickening, discordant hum coming from the ship's fore. The flawed crystal, it was already drawing a small amount of ambient power from the ship's core. And its energy signature felt unstable, wrong, like a musical note played painfully out of key. "The cannon's energy conduits run up the central spine of the ship," he said, pointing towards a massive, heavily armored pillar in the center of the room. "The access ladder is there. We need to get to the focusing chamber, swap the crystals, and get out before anyone even knows we were here." He pulled the real prime crystal from the waterproof pouch at his belt. It was cool to the touch, and it seemed to absorb the dim, red light, a single point of calm, stable energy in the chaotic thrum of the engine room. They climbed out of the reservoir, their wet clothes clinging to them, and began their ascent. It was a vertical maze of ladders, catwalks, and narrow maintenance shafts. Ty Lee, now in her element, took the lead. She moved with a silent, fluid grace, a ghost in the machine, her light footsteps making no sound on the metal grates. She tested each rung, scouted each junction, her body a living sensor, detecting the patrol patterns of the engine room crew through the vibrations in the ship's structure. As they climbed, their calm link, shielded from the ship's interference by a layer of Naruto's Ryuki, crackled to life. It was Mai's voice, low and tense, filled with the static of a poor connection. "I'm in the comms tower." Kenji was right. The weevil's sloppy. He used a military-grade encryption terminal, but he had to bypass the primary security protocols to route his messages off the island. It's left a scar on the system, a ghost image of his command signature. I can't get a name, not yet, but I can track his location. He's here. In the fortress. And he's on the move. Get out of there, Naruto whispered into the comm. If he knows you're on his trail, he'll. The comm went dead, not static. A clean, sudden silence. A cold dread washed over Naruto. They had underestimated their enemy. The weevil was not just a traitor. He was a hunter. There was no time to dwell on it. They had a mission to complete. They reached the level just below the main deck, a cramped, sweltering service corridor that ran directly beneath the massive housing of the Breath of Ozai cannon. The hum of the flawed crystal was palpable here, a nauseating, discordant vibration that made the fillings in their teeth ache. The main access hatch is there, Ty Lee whispered, pointing to a heavy, circular steel plate in the ceiling, secured by a series of complex mag locks. It leads directly into the calibration chamber, right below the lens array. But it's going to be locked down tight. Naruto placed his hand on the hatch. He could feel the powerful electromagnetic locks, and beyond them, the chaotic energy of the flawed crystal. Forcing the locks would trigger every alarm on the ship. Then we don't use the door, he said. He focused his Ryuki, not into a blast of force, but into a high-frequency vibration, a precise, resonant wave that he channeled into the molecular structure of the steel. It was a technique of surgical precision, akin to a singer shattering a glass with a single, perfect note. The armored plate of the hatch didn't break or bend. It simply dissolved. The molecules unbonded, and a perfect, circular section of the 2-inch thick steel turned to a fine, metallic dust that rained down silently onto the floor. They hoisted themselves up into the calibration chamber. It was a claustrophobic, semicircular space, dominated by the massive, crystalline structure of the focusing lens array that hung from the ceiling. Wires and conduits snaked across every surface, and the air was filled with the sharp, sterile scent of ozone. At the heart of the intricate, multifaceted lens, he could see it. The flawed prime crystal. It looked identical to the real one. But its light was a sickly, flickering yellow, and the energy it radiated felt parasitic, hungry. Time seemed to slow down. Naruto moved with a preternatural calm, his hands working. With the delicate precision of a surgeon. He knew, with an instinct that transcended memory, how the mechanism worked. He had to decouple the flawed crystal from the array without breaking the energy circuit, which would trigger a failsafe and alert the bridge. He used his Ryuki to create a temporary, invisible bypass, a bridge of pure energy that fooled the system into thinking the crystal was still in place. With the circuit bypassed, he gently unlocked the housing and removed the flawed crystal. The moment it was free of the array, the nauseating hum ceased. The chamber fell silent. He could feel the flawed stone in his hand, pulsing with a malevolent, unstable energy, like a trapped and furious insect. He handed the real crystal to Ty Lee, who held it with the reverence of a holy relic. Hurry, Naruto, she urged, her eyes wide, darting towards the chronometer on the wall. They had less than 5 minutes until the scheduled firing. He was about to insert the real crystal when a voice, cold and amused, echoed from the access hatch behind them. Such a remarkable talent. A pity it has to be wasted. Naruto spun around. Standing in the hatchway, framed by the corridor beyond, was a figure that made his blood run cold. It was Admiral Isamu, but this was not the rigid, fanatical zealot from the dock. The sneer was gone, replaced by a cool, intelligent smile. The fanaticism in his eyes had been replaced by a sharp, predatory cunning. He held a small, advanced-looking sidearm, and it was aimed directly at Ty Lee's heart. You, Naruto breathed, the single word a mixture of shock and dawning, horrified understanding. Me, Isamu confirmed with a slight, mocking bow. It is a disappointment, I know. It's always the one you least suspect, isn't that what the stories say? Though, in my case, you probably should have suspected me first. All of it, Naruto realized aloud. Your fanaticism, your rigid adherence to the rules, it was all a mask. The perfect cover. Who would Veer suspect the Fire Lord's most loyal dog of being the one to bite him? Loyalty is a currency, Isamu said, his voice laced with a weary cynicism. And Ozai's currency is worthless. He pays in fear and demands perfection. The Earth Kingdom, they pay in gold. And more importantly, they offer a future where I am not simply a tool, but a king. He gestured with his weapon. Now, step away from the array. You have been a fascinating complication, but your part in this little drama is over. You won't get away with this, Ty Lee said, her voice trembling but defiant. She stood her ground, clutching the real crystal to her chest. Isamu chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. My dear girl, I already have. In a few moments, the princess will give the order to fire. This ship will detonate in a glorious, blue fireball. She, and everyone on the bridge, will be vaporized. The blame will fall on the unfortunate, and now conveniently dead, Chief Engineer Kenji, whose daughter, my men have just confirmed, has been silenced. A wave of cold fury washed over Naruto at his callous words. And I, Isamu continued, will be seen as a tragic hero, the sole survivor of the command staff who tried desperately to avert the disaster. My escape vessel is waiting. The weevil will die, and a new, very wealthy, and very powerful man will be born from his ashes. He was a monster, a sociopath who saw human lives as nothing more than pieces on a pie show board. You made one mistake, Naruto said, his voice dangerously quiet. His crimson aura began to glow, a soft, menacing light in the cramped chamber. Oh, Isamu's eyebrow arched in amusement. And what might that be? You threatened my friends. The world exploded into motion. Naruto didn't charge. He moved sideways, a blur of motion. Simultaneously, Ty Lee, with a dancer's grace, dropped to the floor, rolling behind a solid conduit pipe, shielding her body and the crystal. Isamu fired. The weapon discharged not a bullet, but a compressed beam of concussive force, which slammed into the spot where Naruto had been a split second before, buckling the steel wall. Naruto flowed around the edge of the chamber, his speed unnatural. Isamu, a seasoned warrior despite his rank, was preternaturally calm. He tracked Naruto's movement, firing again and again, his aim precise, leading his target like a master huntsman. Each blast tore through the chamber, severing power lines, shattering diagnostic screens, turning the small space into a death trap of sparking wires and ricocheting shrapnel. On the bridge, Azula felt the ship shudder from the impacts deep within its hull. The lights flickered. What was that? She snapped, her diversion momentarily forgotten. Minor energy fluctuations from the cannon's power-up sequence, Princess, a bridge officer reported, his voice tight. Perfectly normal. Azula's eyes narrowed. She knew it wasn't normal. She glanced at the chronometer. 30 seconds to firing. She had to trust him. She turned our attention back to the sputtering admiral. Did you hear me, Isamu? I said I wanted this floor waxed. With the tears of your incompetent subordinates. Back in the calibration chamber, Naruto knew he couldn't dodge forever. He needed to close the distance. As Isamu fired again, Naruto didn't dodge. He met the concussive blast head-on. His Ryuki flared, absorbing the kinetic energy. He was thrown back, slamming into the far wall. But he was unharmed. The move, however, gave him the opening he needed. While Isamu was momentarily blinded by the flare of Naruto's aura, Ty Lee moved. She was a blur of motion, her small form rocketing out from behind the pipe. She didn't attack Isamu. She ran along the wall, her movements impossibly fast and agile, and with a final leap, she reached the array. With a deft, practiced movement, she slammed the real crystal into its housing. The effect was instantaneous. The entire ship seemed to take a deep, shuddering breath. The sickly yellow light of the flawed crystal was replaced by a pure, steady, crimson gold glow from the real one. The discordant hum was replaced by a smooth, powerful thrum of pure, stable energy. The heart of the inferno was healed. Isamu spun around, his eyes wide with disbelief as he saw the array glowing with a healthy light. He had failed, but in that moment of distraction, he had forgotten about Naruto. Naruto launched himself across the room. He was on Isamu in an instant, his hand clamping down on the admiral's wrist, his fingers like steel bands. He squeezed. There was a sickening crack of bone, and Isamu screamed, the weapon clattering to the floor. Naruto drove a palm heel strike into the admiral's chest, not with the full, explosive force of his Ryuki, but with a focused, controlled burst. It was enough. AMU was thrown back against the wall and collapsed, unconscious. The comm crackled to life. It was Azula's voice, sharp and urgent. Naruto, what's happening? I'm out of time. I have to give the order. The crystal is in place. He yelled back, scooping up the flawed, pulsating stone from the floor. The ship is safe. On the bridge, a profound sense of relief washed over Azula. She straightened up, her theatrical tantrum vanishing, replaced by a cold, regal authority. "Fire Lord Ozai," she said, her voice broadcast across the ship and to the assembled dignitaries on the observation deck, "in your name. And for the glory of the Fire Nation, fire." With a deep, soul-shaking hum, the breath of Ozai cannon charged. A brilliant, blinding beam of pure, golden-red energy erupted from its barrel, lancing out across the sea. It struck a designated target, a barren, rocky islet 5 miles away, and the world went white. When the light faded, the islet was simply gone. Vaporized. A mushroom cloud of superheated steam was the only evidence it had ever existed. A stunned silence fell over the observers, followed by a wave of awed, terrified applause. The demonstration was a staggering, unqualified success. In the calibration chamber, Naruto held the flawed crystal. It was pulsing violently now, reacting to the massive energy discharge from the cannon. It was going to detonate. He didn't have time to get it off the ship. He looked at the hole in the floor he had created, the hole that led down into the ship's guts. There was only one place to put it. "Tai Li, get clear," he yelled. He wrapped the unstable crystal in a thick, dense layer of his own Ryuki, trying to contain the imminent explosion. He then dropped through the floor, plummeting down through the ship's interior, a crimson meteor falling towards the engine room. He landed in the coolant reservoir, the water cushioning his fall. The crystal in his hand was glowing white-hot, the energy within it about to breach his containment field. He shoved it deep into the roaring mouth of the coolant intake pipe, the very pipe they had used to enter the ship. The unstable energy of the crystal met the raw, geothermal power of the intake. For a single, terrifying moment, the two forces battled. Then, the flawed crystal imploded. The resulting explosion was contained and funneled by the massive, reinforced pipe, the blast of energy shooting harmlessly back out into the sea deep beneath the fortress, a silent, unseen detonation. Naruto was thrown back by the shockwave, but his Ryuki shield held. He surfaced, gasping for air in the suddenly quiet engine room. The ship was safe. The mission was over. He climbed back up to the calibration chamber. Tai Li rushed to him, her eyes wide with relief and awe. He was exhausted, his Ryuki reserves dangerously low. But he was alive. Their calm crackled again. This time, it was a voice they hadn't expected. It was Iro. "Naruto. Tai Li, are you all right?" Maya's here. She's safe. But she's injured." The relief of their victory was instantly replaced by a cold, sharp spike of fear. The weevil was caught, but the ghost in the machine had one last, parting gift. Chapter 9 End. The end. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.